Hi there. Tonight we're going to step into the brittle silence of a medieval winter morning, inside a hut made almost entirely of rough, hand-cut timber. This is the kind of place where the walls seem to groan as if they're alive, and every single gust of wind outside feels like it's searching for cracks to slip through. You're lying underneath a thin, patchwork blanket, your body pressed right up against the warmth of others. And still, you can see your own breath drifting away like smoke in the faint glow of the embers. The roof beams above you are beaded with frost, with delicate crystals glistening like some kind of icy constellation. You have a sudden, clear thought that you probably wouldn't survive this if you had to do it for real. So before you get too comfortable, take a quick moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you happen to be listening right now, please leave a comment with your location and the time of night. There's just something strangely cozy about knowing where in the world everyone else is lying awake. Now, let's dim the lights and slip a little deeper into the story. The hut you're waking up in is a world away from our modern comforts. Imagine walls made of split logs, with the gaps between them smeared with clay or dung to try and keep out the drafts, though they're never perfectly sealed. A thatched roof sags just slightly under the weight of snow, and each individual stalk of straw is rigid with ice. Beneath you is a crude floor of packed earth, scattered with straw that's meant to soften it, though it's damp in spots where melted snow has seeped through. The air is dense and still, and it carries that faint, acrid perfume of smoke that never truly seems to leave, no matter how often the fire is stoked. You begin to stir, half buried under the heap of bodies that served as bedding. It's a mainstream historical fact that medieval families very often slept all together. Parents, children, and even servants would press shoulder to shoulder, simply to conserve whatever heat they could. It wasn't just about affection, it was a matter of physics. You can feel the weight of a younger sibling curled up against your legs, the comforting warmth of your mother's back at your side. And above you, the sound of your father's cough scrapes and rattles through the rafters. Even with all this, the night has not been an easy one. You remember the sharp, biting pang of cold waking you up again and again, and the way the frost crept across your toes despite the layers of wool. You're grateful for the blanket, but it feels more like a quilt made of memories than an effective insulator, pieced together from scraps of old cloth stitched by careful hands, heavy, but not entirely warm. You tuck it tighter right under your chin, chasing after whatever little warmth is left. There is something truly uncanny about these mornings, when the night hasn't quite let go and the day hasn't yet begun. The soft glow of the embers paints the ceiling with red patches, like smudged, blurry stains. Outside, a rooster crows into the darkness, far too early, its cry muffled by the heavy blanket of snow. Inside, every little sound echoes. The creak of timber beams as they expand and contract, the quiet whisper of breath, the occasional scuttling of a mouse bold enough to search for crumbs. Historians still debate whether frost was truly as constant inside these huts as we tend to imagine, or if the steady fires kept the cold more at bay than our romanticized accounts might suggest. Some scholars claim that the surviving embers could keep the huts tolerably warm. Others believe that waking up to see your breath fogging the room was just an unavoidable truth of winter life. You, of course, don't have the luxury of debating any of this. The shiver that runs right through you is proof enough that the cold is very, very real. A quirky little tidbit drifts through your mind. In some households, people would rub fat or grease onto their faces before they went to bed. Hopping it would act like a primitive moisturizer and guard against the sting of the frost. You can almost smell it now, mingled with the scent of hay and the earthy smell of the animals that sometimes shared your hut. The idea makes you grimace for a moment, but then again, anything to keep your skin from cracking open in the bitter air might have seemed worth the effort. The door, which is little more than a plank propped into place, rattles under another gust of wind. You think of the wolves, always somewhere out there in the stories, if not just beyond the edge of the clearing. That thought brings a nervous flutter to your stomach. Yet for right now, the danger feels far away, muffled by snow drifts and silenced by the intense cold. What's closer is the sound of your father rising, stirring the coals with a stick and muttering under his breath as he tries to coax a flame from the faint glow. A hiss, a spark, and then the smell of wood smoke beginning to bloom again. A wave of relief spreads through the room, though no one else stirs except for you. The medieval day starts in darkness and in silence, and you realize the night hasn't so much ended as it has blurred into another phase of endurance. Sleep was never quite a seamless experience. It broke often, stretched out long, and was woven through with dreams and discomforts. You blink your eyes, watching the frost tremble on the rafters, hearing the fire finally catch, and feeling your mother shift slightly closer to the growing warmth. This is where your day begins. It doesn't start with an alarm or with the hum of a heater, but with the deep ache of cold, the fragile glow of embers, and the slow, gradual awareness that you have survived another night in a wooden hut against a brutal winter. And even though you want nothing more than to burrow deeper into the warmth, the creak of the timbers reminds you that morning has come, and survival demands that you rise. You just lie there, reluctant to move, feeling the stiffness in your limbs from the cold. The air inside the hut is so sharp that it nips at your nose and your cheeks. And when you pull the patchwork cover up higher, the warmth is fleeting, like trying to trap smoke in your hands. A low groan comes from the corner of the room where another body shifts on the straw, and the sound reminds you that you are never truly alone in this space. Privacy in this world simply doesn't exist. In fact, the very idea would seem absurd, because survival here demands togetherness. Families clustered together on straw pallets weren't just a matter of comfort. They were living insulation. A well-known historical fact tells us that beds as we know them today, with frames and mattresses and bedding, were luxuries reserved only for lords and wealthy households. For the common folk, sleep was a much simpler and far harsher affair. Imagine a single large heap of straw laid out on the packed earth, flattened and prickly, with hides, wool, or whatever cloth could be spared layered over it. Whole families would gather there, limbs tangling, backs pressed to bellies, their faces hidden under the same worn blanket. This closeness wasn't optional at all. It was the difference between making it through the winter night and shivering into exhaustion. You can feel the weight of that closeness right now. Your younger brother, small and restless, is wedged in at your side. His feet, as cold as stones, push against your legs, searching for any warmth they can find. Beyond him, your sister is curled up as tight as a hedgehog, her hair a wild tangle against your arm. Your mother, at the center of the pile, holds the smallest child, a toddler still at that age when sleep comes easily, no matter how cold it is. And on the far edge, your father stretches his long legs out, trying to shield everyone from the drafts that creep through the gaps in the wall. A quirky tidbit whispers its way into the scene. Sometimes, these straw pallets were not just for humans. In the smallest of huts, animals might share the bedding space too, particularly young goats or lambs. Their warmth was precious, and while the smell might not have been pleasant, the comfort of another living, breathing body far outweighed the inconvenience. It was a rustic form of heating, one that was alive, breathing, and sometimes loud. You can just imagine a goat bleating softly in the night, or a hen flapping its wings near your feet, both of them companions and necessities in this constant struggle against the cold. Historians still debate whether these communal sleeping arrangements fostered stronger family bonds, or if they led to frustrations that quietly simmered through the long, dark winters. Some argue that the intimacy created a sense of resilience and shared hardship. Others suggest that tensions must have run high when everyone, from infants to the elderly, was pressed together night after night with absolutely no escape. You can imagine both of these things being true. The comfort of knowing you were never alone was surely a balm. Yet at times, the constant press of bodies must have felt suffocating. The sensations of a night like this are etched into your body. The itch of straw pricking you through your thin cloth. The heaviness of a sibling's elbow pressing into your ribs. The musky odor of wool blankets that have gone unwashed for months. And above all else, the shared rhythm of breath. The hut itself almost becomes an organism. Every person inside contributes heat, sound, and scent to its atmosphere. You fall asleep and wake up again, not as an individual, but as a small piece of a larger, huddled whole. As the dawn pushes a faint, gray light through the cracks in the wooden slats, the sight is almost comical. There are limbs sprawled across each other, mouths agape, hair stuck up in wild tufts, children drooling onto sleeves, and parents muttering words from half-finished dreams. The hut is less of a bedroom and more of a communal nest, improvised but completely necessary. You shift just slightly, brushing some straw aside, and realize just how much of medieval life revolved around these simple accommodations. The floor underneath the pallet is uneven, just packed earth that grows damp whenever snow melts near the door. To combat this dampness, families would sometimes add layers of reeds or dry leaves underneath the straw. Yet, no matter how carefully it was all arranged, by the end of the winter the bed was flattened, filthy, and swarming with tiny intruders. Lice, fleas, and mites were a constant presence, and many households just accepted them as inevitable companions. You scratch at your neck, half in memory and half in irritation, because you know that rest was never free of these kinds of interruptions. Still, the warmth of human company outweighs all the discomfort. Just imagine trying to sleep alone in that hut. The cold would press down on you, the silence would be oppressive, and the fear of wolves or spirits would be heightened without your family beside you. Each breath reassures you that life continues, that you are part of something resilient. It is a lesson in survival that modern sleepers, tucked away in their private rooms, might find difficult to fully grasp. This closeness wasn't an inconvenience, it was a lifeline. A curious comparison comes to mind when you think about noble households. While peasants shared a single pallet, wealthier families often had large wooden beds with heavy curtains. These curtains weren't just for decoration. They served as insulation, trapping body heat inside a small, cozy cocoon. Yet, in a way, your straw pallet achieves a similar effect simply through numbers. What the lords accomplished with fabric, the peasants accomplished with flesh and breath. There is also the element of safety to consider. Lying together means that no one is left vulnerable at the edge of the hut. If a draft seeps in, if a noise outside jolts you awake, if a child starts to cry, the family responds as one. You're never truly defenseless when you are part of the heap, and though your body aches from the lack of space, you know deep down that you would not trade it for solitude. Even dreams seem to be shared in this environment. One sibling mutters in their sleep, another kicks at imaginary threats, and you find yourself half dreaming of the same wolves or raiders, as if these fears just seep into the entire cluster of sleepers. Perhaps this is why folklore and superstition flourished so much, because the collective experience blurred the lines between what was real and what was dreamed. Your father stirs again, rising to feed the fire. His movement rouses the others, and slowly the nest of bodies begins to untangle itself. Children rub their eyes, mothers hush their bobbies, and the hut fills with the low murmur of waking voices. Mourning is never a quiet affair because survival demands activity. Already the straw pallet seems less like a bed and more like a reminder of what needs to be done. It is time to rise, to fetch wood, to face another day of endurance. You roll over, reluctant to leave the collective warmth of the group. The cold outside that blanket is so immediate, so biting, that you hesitate for a moment. Yet the rhythm of life allows for no delay. You smile faintly, knowing that tonight and tomorrow, and through many more nights still to come, you will return to this very same place, this same cluster of bodies, this same fragile warmth in the heart of winter's unending brutality. You stretch your legs out beneath the covers, trying to rub some warmth back into your toes. Even with all the bodies huddled together on the straw, the cold just lingers like a guest that refuses to leave. The blanket slips from your shoulders, and you hastily pull it back up, feeling the coarse, patched fabric scrape across your skin. In this dim firelight, you notice something you never really pay attention to in the summer: the layers of clothing you wear even while you sleep. It's a well-known historical fact that medieval people rarely undressed for bed the way modern sleepers do. Night clothes, as we would understand them, were not common outside of wealthier households. Instead, peasants simply slept in their day garments or in whatever spare tunics and cloaks they could manage to pile on. The goal was never comfort. It was pure survival. You glance down at yourself now, bundled in a rough wool tunic, with a faded linen shift underneath it, and a patched cloak thrown across your shoulders. Your legs are wrapped in thick hose, the wool itchy but blessedly warm, and at your feet, a pair of cloth wrappings serve as makeshift socks. The sensation is a familiar one: the constant, nagging itch of wool, the heaviness of damp fabric, the way the layers twist around uncomfortably during the night. And yet, you know that without them, the cold would have gnawed at your skin much more fiercely. You remember your mother's words, muttered each and every evening as she urged you to add another layer. "Better the itch than the chill," she would say. A quirky tidbit emerges from your memory. Some peasants would stuff straw or scraps of fabric into their clothes to act as extra insulation. Just imagine tucking handfuls of dry grass into the gaps of your tunic, turning your own body into a kind of scarecrow, but one that was shielded against the harsh night air. In the most desperate winters, even that seemed like a clever trick, and you can almost hear the rustle of straw with every movement you make. Historians still argue whether this practice of layering was universal, or if it was more common in the northern regions where the winters were much harsher. Some accounts suggest that southern peasants, living in milder climates, may have shed some layers for comfort. Others insist that all across Europe, the fear of the cold outweighed any desire for lightness in sleep. You suspect that the truth, as it always does, lies somewhere in between, with habits shaped by geography, by poverty, and by sheer necessity. You look around at your family now, noting how each person is wrapped in their own peculiar fashion. Your father is wearing the same cloak he uses for work in the fields, its hem frayed and its wool stiff with use. Your mother has layered 2 linen shifts underneath a heavy overdress, and she pulls a faded scarf over her hair, tucking the ends under her chin to keep her face warm. Your sister clutches a piece of fur that is so tattered it barely counts as fur anymore, yet it shields her hands as she tucks them close to her chest. The smell of these garments is hard to ignore. It's a mix of smoke, sweat, and damp wool. Washing clothes in the winter is a rare event. The water is frozen, the streams are dangerous, and drying fabric in the cold air is nearly impossible. Instead, the garments carry the memory of every day's labor, every hearth fire, and every night's sleep. They are less like clothing and more like companions in survival, worn thin but stubbornly protective. You shift on the straw, adjusting your cloak around your shoulders, and think of those rare luxuries you've only heard about. Lords in their castles with fur-lined robes, wealthy merchants with feather-stuffed mattresses and fine linen nightshirts. Such stories feel more like legends than actual reality. For you, sleep is always wrapped in the scratch of wool, the weight of patched cloth, and the shared warmth of garments passed down from an elder to a child. And yet, there is something comforting in the ritual of dressing for bed. Each evening, as the fire dies low, your family prepares for sleep not by shedding clothes, but by adding them. Scarves are wound tighter, cloaks are pulled closer, and woolen caps are tugged down over ears. The act itself becomes a kind of signal. The world outside is cold, but together, wrapped and layered, you will endure. The air in the hut prickles against your skin as your father opens the door for just a moment to check the snow. A blast of icy wind sweeps through, and you shiver violently, pulling the blanket tighter around you. The importance of those layers is completely undeniable. Without them, that one gust of wind could pierce straight through your body. With them, you are shielded, however imperfectly, from the sharp teeth of winter. There is also a certain dignity in these garments. They carry the marks of your family's resourcefulness and history. The patch your mother sewed on last spring, the wool that was dyed with onion skins to give it a faint color, the linen woven by your grandmother's hands decades ago. To sleep in these clothes is to wrap yourself not only in warmth but also in memory. Each stitch tells a story. Each patch is a reminder that your family has faced many winters just like this one before. Still, the discomfort is unavoidable. You turn over restless, the fabric bunching up beneath you, the itch of the wool relentless. You scratch at your arm, then sigh, trying to find some stillness again. Perhaps this is why medieval people were so accustomed to segmented sleep, waking once in the middle of the night, tossing and turning, and then drifting back under again. The body, restless under all those layers of cloth, seemed to demand small breaks before surrendering again to slumber. A faint murmur drifts through the hut as your sister complains about the itch of her blanket. Your mother hushes her, reminding her softly that warmth matters more than comfort, and you think with a wry smile that medieval parenting was often just a negotiation between endurance and complaint. You close your eyes again, adjusting the cloak around your neck, and let yourself drift. The cold is still there, but it's dulled by the embrace of fabric and family. Your body, wrapped and weighted down, finally begins to relax. And though your dreams will likely be filled with frost and discomfort, there is also a strange reassurance in knowing that even in such hardship, you are clothed, shielded, and bound to others in the fight against the brutal winter. The night stretches on, and with it comes the sound of fabric rustling, the faint itch of wool, and the steady warmth of layered bodies, all struggling together against the relentless cold. Sleep, as imperfect as it is, returns carried not by comfort, but by an endurance that is stitched into every single thread you wear. You stir again, restless in the night, and the crackle of the fire has now dimmed to a faint whisper. The cold presses closer now, creeping through the gaps in the hut, and you instinctively burrow deeper under the blanket. Yet there's another source of warmth nearby, one that you have grown so accustomed to that you hardly even think of it: your animal companions. It's a well-established historical fact that in many medieval households, animals were not kept in separate barns or sheds, but often shared the very same living space as the family. In smaller cottages and wooden huts, especially in the winter, it was entirely normal for livestock to spend the night indoors. Chickens, goats, pigs, even a calf or two might huddle just a few feet away from your bed. Their bodies added precious warmth to the air in the hut. This mingling of human and animal life might seem odd to our modern sensibilities, but it was practical, efficient, and absolutely essential for survival. You shift slightly on the straw and you can hear it, the soft grunt of a pig settling into its own pile of hay near the hearth. The smell is undeniable, earthy and pungent, blending with the smoke and damp wool until it just becomes the scent of daily life. Somewhere in the shadows, a chicken rustles, its feathers brushing against the floor as it finds a place to roost. These sounds are part of your nightly lullaby, familiar and oddly reassuring. For where there are animals, there is heat. And where there is heat, there is hope of making it through the night. A quirky tidbit whispers into your memory. There were stories told of children who grew so fond of their animal bedfellows that they preferred the pig's warmth to that of their own siblings. A pig, after all, radiates heat just like a living stove, its plump body creating a kind of comfort that no woolen cloak could ever rival. You can imagine the simple joy of resting your frozen feet against its side, the relief flooding through your body as the chill finally ebbs away. Historians still argue about whether this practice was widespread across all regions, or if it was more characteristic of Northern Europe, where the winters were particularly brutal. Some scholars suggest that in wealthier parts of the continent, animals were kept separate to avoid disease and filth, while in poorer or more rural communities, necessity simply overruled hygiene. Whatever the truth may be, the mingling of species under one roof left its mark on the daily rhythms of life, shaping not only how people slept, but how they experienced life itself. You glance across the dim hut now. Your father is snoring softly, his body turned toward the hearth where the pig is grunting. Your sister stirs, murmuring in her sleep, her small hand reaching out until it brushes against the fur of a goat tethered nearby. The animal shifts but does not protest. It too is grateful for the shared warmth. Your mother's breathing is steady and rhythmic, her arm cradling the youngest child close against her chest. All around you, the hut feels less like a simple structure of wood and clay, and more like a crowded ark of survival, human and animal alike, united against the storm. The air is heavy with their mingled breath. It steams in the faint glow of the embers, rising in little clouds that curl upward toward the rafters. Each sound adds to the nocturnal chorus. The steady thrum of snoring, the occasional bleat, the scratch of claws as a chicken shifts. It is not a quiet night, but there is a feeling of safety in this symphony, a constant reminder that life endures even when the frost claws at the door. There is another advantage to having the animals inside: protection. Pigs will grunt at strange noises. Dogs will bark if something is lurking outside. Geese will hiss at shadows. In the deep silence of medieval nights, these living alarms were just as vital as the warmth they provided. You can almost imagine a wolf prowling near the edge of the village, deterred not by walls, but by the racket of all the beasts within. In this way, your family shares not only warmth, but also watchfulness, with every creature acting as a sentinel in its own fashion. You stretch your legs again, and your foot brushes against the straw where the goat lies. The warmth radiates back instantly, and for a moment you sigh with relief. Then you shift back, knowing that this comfort comes with a cost. The smells that cling to your clothes, the fleas that find their way from animal hides into human bedding, the uneasy knowledge that your sleep is shared with more than just your family. Yet in the hierarchy of medieval worries, warmth far outranks odor, and so you accept it. Just think of how this arrangement must have shaped childhood memories. A medieval child's lullabies would have included not only their mother's voice, but also the grunt of a pig, the bleat of a goat, and the rustle of hens. Their dreams would have carried the sounds and scents of a barn, because in truth their bedroom was part barn. And when they grew older, they would perhaps laugh at the memory, or tell stories of winters where a cow's side was their very best heater. In this dim hut, you close your eyes again, drifting with all the sounds. The warmth of family and the warmth of animals all blend together until it is impossible to separate one from the other. The hut may be fragile, its walls thin, its roof leaking frost, but inside it pulses with life. You breathe it all in, smoke and straw and fur, and though your body aches, your heart feels a little steadier. Still, there is a vulnerability to this scene. Disease can spread easily in such close quarters. Fleas can leap from animal to child. Illnesses can find fertile ground in damp huts filled with so much breath. Historians still puzzle over how much this contributed to medieval health struggles, debating whether the proximity to animals hardened immune systems or actually weakened them. Yet you, living in this moment, cannot worry about such questions. Your concern is simpler. Will the fire last until morning? Will the roof hold against the snow? Will the warmth of all these bodies be enough? You pull the blanket tighter, pressing yourself against your sibling's side, listening to the soft grunt of the pig and the faint scratching of claws. It is a strange kind of comfort, but it is yours. And as your eyes close, you realize the night is not something you have to face alone. Everybody in this hut, human and animal alike, is fighting the cold right alongside you, and together, perhaps you will win this small battle against the endless winter. The night drags on, and though the animals near the hearth are radiating their warmth, you cannot ignore the fading glow of the fire. You shift on the straw and watch the embers pulse faintly, like a struggling heartbeat trying to keep the hut alive. The fire is the absolute center of this fragile universe, and without it, the cold would sweep in completely, entirely unchallenged. You know this because you have felt it on nights when the flame has faltered, the breath freezing in your lungs, the sting in your fingers as sharp as needles, the darkness completely oppressive. It is a mainstream historical fact that most medieval homes, especially peasant huts, had only a simple open hearth. There was no chimney, no graceful escape for the smoke, just a hole in the roof or a vent in the wall if you were lucky. The fire burned right at the center of the room, filling the hut with warmth, but also with smoke so thick that your eyes watered and your lungs ached. And yet, despite this constant discomfort, the hearth was everything. Without it, food could not be cooked, water could not be boiled, and survival through the winter nights was simply impossible. You cough slightly as the smoke curls low. It clings to the rafters, turning the frost black where the soot has settled. The air is heavy, acrid, and you feel the familiar sting in your eyes. Yet perversely, the smoke is also a kind of shield. It drives away pests. It helps to preserve the meat hung above the fire, and it even lingers in the fabric of your clothes, a smoky armor against vermin. You shift your cloak around you, realizing it carries the scent of dozens of nights just like this one, saturated with a smoke that will never fully wash away. A quirky tidbit springs to mind. In some regions, families would deliberately allow their fires to smolder low all night, not to avoid the smoke, but because they believed that evil spirits feared the acrid haze. Just imagine that your stinging eyes and coughing lungs were interpreted not as suffering, but as a form of protection. Parents might reassure their children that the smoke was keeping demons away, and in the wavering half-light of winter, such a belief probably felt very much like the truth. Historians still debate whether medieval huts were truly suffocating with smoke each night, or if clever venting and careful fire maintenance kept the air more breathable than we imagine. Some archaeological studies show blackened rafters and soot-caked walls, clear evidence of centuries of smoky fires. Others argue that with skill and small architectural tricks, families could keep a tolerable balance. You, curled on the straw right now, can only judge by your own watering eyes. The smoke is a constant companion for better or for worse. Your father shifts near the hearth, muttering to himself as he stirs the embers again. He adds a small log, then blows on it gently, coaxing a flame. The orange glow swells for a moment, flickering across the hut, illuminating everyone's faces in its warm light. For a brief instant, you can see everyone clearly. Your mother's tired profile, your siblings' flushed cheeks, the animals shifting in their corners. Then the light shrinks again, settling back into a steady, quiet smolder. The fire itself is small and cautious, as wood is scarce in the winter, and every single log must be stretched to last. You remember the ritual of collecting branches during the autumn. Whole days spent gathering, chopping, and stacking, always with the underlying dread of whether the pile would be enough. Too little wood meant too little fire, and too little fire meant nights of pure suffering. That fear lingers even now, as you hear the crackle grow weak and watch your father hesitate before adding any more fuel. Your throat is dry from the smoky air, and you swallow hard. You think of how the hut smells. Burnt pine resin, damp wood sizzling, smoke thick enough to cling to your hair. This scent will be in your nostrils all winter, so familiar that you may no longer even notice it. Only outsiders like travelers or visitors would comment on the oppressive haze, their eyes watering, their voices catching. For you, this is simply life. The animals stir in their hay as the fire flickers again. The pig grunts, the goat stretches, and a chicken flaps its wings once. They too rely on the warmth, drawn closer to the hearth by pure instinct. The hut feels more crowded as every living being shifts toward the source of the heat. And for a moment, you think of the fire as the true master of this household. You obey it, you tend it, you fear it, and you depend on it. Without it, you are nothing but prey for the cold. There is a real art to keeping it alive. Your father buries the logs with ash, creating a slow, steady burn that will last until dawn. You remember watching him do this as a child, marveling at the way he shaped the fire's life, coaxing it along like a fragile animal. Even now, you cannot resist watching, learning, and committing the motions to your memory. For in the winter, fire is knowledge, and knowledge is survival. And yet there is danger in it, too. You recall the stories whispered around the village, of huts that caught fire in the night, the flames devouring the straw and thatch, and families fleeing barefoot into the snow. The smoke you breathe now, protective in its own way, is also a constant warning of that ever-present risk. You roll over, listening to the crackle, wondering if tonight the flame will remain gentle, or if it might suddenly roar, greedy for air. Despite the unease, the fire begins to lull you. Its glow casts shadows that dance across the walls, turning cracks into shifting shapes. You watch them lazily, letting your mind wander. Some of the shapes look like animals, others like twisted figures, and in your half-dreaming state, they become your companions, flickering in and out of your vision. Your breathing slows, and your body finally starts to relax under the blanket. The smoke still burns your throat, but the warmth is worth it. You think of how each ember is a tiny miracle, carrying forward the promise of another dawn. You wonder if tomorrow will bring more wood, more food, more strength, or if it will simply be another day of endurance. But for now, as your eyes close again, the fire holds. The hut is alive, and in its smoky embrace, you drift once more into an uneasy but necessary sleep. The hut is heavy with smells, smoke, damp wood, and something even earthier that clings to the straw beneath you. As you stir again, your nose wrinkles, not out of surprise but out of a deep familiarity. This is the perfume of survival, and though it would likely horrify a visitor from a distant century, you have never known any other. One well-established detail from medieval households is that the mingled odors of daily life were completely unavoidable. The floor was not made of polished timber, but of packed dirt, sometimes smeared with animal dung and clay to harden it. Over time, moisture would creep in, hay would begin to rot, and the air would grow rich with a cocktail of scents: wet wool, burning peat, sweat, and the acrid tang of smoke. Even so, this was simply the norm. To step outside the hut into the crisp, clean snow might have felt cleaner, but the chill was unforgiving. Inside, you endured the smell because it came hand in hand with warmth. You draw in a breath now and catch the sharpness of damp straw where someone must have spilled water the day before. It blends with the sourness of fermenting ale that's stored in a jug by the hearth. And somewhere beneath it all, the musk of the animals bedding down nearby still lingers. Your senses never truly get to rest because, in this confined space, everything shares the same air. One curious custom recorded in rural communities was the scattering of herbs like mint, sage, or juniper onto the floor or into the bedding. Not only did this add a fresher scent, but it was also believed to drive away vermin. You can just imagine your mother crushing dried leaves between her hands, the fragrance momentarily masking the smell of dung and sweat. Perhaps it worked for a short while, but the smoky haze always reclaimed its dominance in the end. There's an ongoing debate among scholars about how medieval people truly perceived these odors. Were they just dulled to them, their senses hardened by routine? Or did they quietly long for relief, dreaming of the rare, clean scent of linen that had been washed in icy rivers? Modern noses recoil at descriptions of reek and rot. But perhaps in their time, such smells were simply invisible, just part of the backdrop of existence. The walls of the hut themselves added their own contribution to the aroma. Built of logs sealed with clay and dung, they released a musty tang whenever dampness seeped in. Touching the wall with your palm would leave an earthy residue on your skin. In the summer, the smell was sharper, almost grassy. In the winter, it thickened, heavy with trapped moisture and smoke. Your body does adjust, though. You notice that after a few moments, you no longer register the strength of the odor until a new one is added to the mix. A waft of charred wood from the hearth, a sudden whiff of goat, or the sharp tang of someone's unwashed feet. Each arrival makes the air shift again, layering scent upon scent until the hut itself becomes a tapestry of survival. You smile faintly, recalling how the children sometimes played games, guessing the source of different smells. A sibling might wrinkle their nose and accuse another of bringing the pig stench into the bedding. Another would counter with a laugh, pointing at the boots that were drying by the door. Humor seemed to soften the burden, even when the truth was undeniable. Everything smelled because everything was alive, enclosed, and enduring it all together. From outside, the wind whistles, cold and clean. You imagine the stark contrast of stepping out into it, your lungs filling with air so sharp it stings, only to retreat moments later, desperate for the warmth of the hut. The odor within, however heavy it might be, suddenly feels preferable when it's weighed against frostbite. You realize that survival completely reshapes your values. A smoky, pungent hut means life. Fresh air, if it ends up killing you, is no luxury at all. The sensory overload influences your dreams too. When you drift off into slumber, the scents bleed into your visions. Smoke becomes shadowy figures. The sourness of the ale morphs into strange, grand feasts. The musk of the animals turns into phantom herds running across snowy fields. Medieval dreams were never silent or scentless. They were crowded, just as their waking hours were. Experts haven't reached a consensus on whether these odors contributed to the spread of disease. Some medical historians argue that the poor air quality weakened lungs, feeding illnesses like consumption. Others insist that the smoke, despite the discomfort, may have actually sterilized the air, reducing infection risks. Whatever the truth is, you know what you feel. Your eyes sting and your throat rasps. But without this smoky haze, you would be far colder, far hungrier, and far less alive. You curl deeper into the blanket now, closing your eyes against the sting of the ash. Your skin prickles from the damp straw. Your nose twitches at the musk of the animals, but there is a comfort hidden in it all. These scents are the rhythm of your life, binding you to the hut, to your family, and to the animals that are sharing the air with you. And though modern noses might call it unbearable, to you, it is the smell of home. The embers glow faintly, and the shadows dance once more across the smoke-stained rafters. You let the heaviness of the hut's atmosphere settle over you like another blanket. It is imperfect, pungent, and suffocating at times, but it is yours. With it comes the promise that another dawn will eventually arrive. And with that dawn, the fragile continuation of life in this wooden shell. The glow of the fire dips low again. But this time, your father doesn't feed it. Instead, he kneels down carefully, scooping up ash with his practiced hands, burying the coals beneath a gray blanket of dust. You watch him drowsily, wondering why he would hide the very thing that is keeping you alive. Yet you've seen this ritual countless times before, and you know its purpose: to preserve the fire until morning without wasting any precious wood. Records from the period make it clear that banking the embers was a nightly ritual in countless medieval households. Without matches or any easy fire-making tools, letting the flames die out entirely meant hours of labor just to rekindle them. Flint and steel could create a spark, yes, but coaxing a flame from dry tinder in the damp winter air was a frustrating gamble. So families tended to their embers like fragile treasures, tucking them into the ash where they could smolder safely until dawn. You remember how as a child you were mesmerized by the glowing coals. They looked alive, breathing slowly, poolsing red beneath their blanket of ash. Your father would hush you when you tried to poke at them, warning that too much air would kill the glow. Even now, you resist the temptation to stir them yourself. The embers are patient but fragile, and careless fingers can end a family's warmth in a matter of seconds. One curious custom that is sometimes mentioned in village law was the belief that if the embers died during the night, it was a sign of bad luck for the household. Some families even whispered small charms over the hearth, half prayer and half habit, to ensure the glow would last until sunrise. You can just imagine your grandmother muttering her words in the dark, pressing a cross of ash onto the hearthstone before she covered the fire. Whether or not the charm actually worked, the act itself provided some reassurance. Academic circles remain divided on exactly how effective this method really was. Some argue that smothering embers under ash produced carbon monoxide and made the huts dangerously smoky, while others believe the technique was surprisingly safe when it was done with care. Archaeological finds of hearths layered in ash suggest the practice was widespread, so perhaps the truth lies in the balance. Too much ash suffocated the flame, while too little allowed it to flare up. The skill was in the judgment, honed by long winters and endless nights of practice. You picture the embers now, faint and hidden, yet still breathing. The hut darkens without the flame, leaving only soft orange glimmers seeping through the ash. It feels as though the heart of the house has been tucked into bed, just as the family has. Around you, bodies settle down again, sighing into slumber. The pig grunts once and curls deeper into its straw. The goat exhales. Your sister murmurs in her sleep. The night resumes its rhythm, quieter now, soothed by the certainty that warmth waits for you beneath the ashes. The act of banking the embers also carried a symbolic weight. Fire was not just a tool, but a sacred presence. In some communities, the hearth fires were never allowed to die, passed from one generation to the next like a living heirloom. You can imagine a bride carrying glowing coals from her childhood home to her new household, kindling her married life with the continuity of the flame. Such gestures remind you that fire was more than just heat. It was identity, connection, and even a blessing. You shift slightly, pulling your cloak up higher, and remember the times when the fire did go out. Those mornings were miserable. Your father would crouch with his flint and steel, sparks flying uselessly onto the damp tinder, while everyone else huddled together and shivered. The memory alone makes you appreciate the faint glow that is hidden under the ash tonight. Survival feels just a little bit lighter when you know the fire is still breathing. There is also a practical rhythm to it. The banking of the embers signals that the household's day is truly done. The chores are finished, the animals are fed, and the pallet has been claimed. No more work will be attempted until daylight finally arrives. It is the medieval equivalent of switching off the last light, a closing ritual that binds the family into one shared act of rest. You close your eyes, comforted by the knowledge that the fire has been put to sleep just as you have. Still, you wonder, what if a gust of wind sneaks through the cracks and snuffs it out? What if the ash shifts and the coals cool down too quickly? The uncertainty is always there, lurking in the back of your mind. Yet worry cannot change the outcome. Like so much in your world, it rests on trust in skill, in practice, and in the stubborn resilience of the fire itself. You exhale into the dark, your breath curling like smoke, and let the faint warmth of the banked embers seep into your bones. Tomorrow they will be uncovered, coaxed back to flame, and the cycle will continue. For now, you rest in the quiet knowledge that your family has carried fire into another night, guarding it like a secret, fragile flame against the winter's endless hunger. The hut grows still again, wrapped in silence, punctuated only by the faint sigh of ash settling. You let your eyelids droop, your body heavy with fatigue. Somewhere deep inside the hearth, beneath its dusty shroud, the embers are glowing patiently. You imagine them like tiny guardians waiting in the dark, ensuring that when the sun finally rises, warmth will greet you once more. And with that thought, you finally drift, soothed by the hidden heartbeat of fire sleeping under ash. The night stretches on, long and deep, and as your body shifts restlessly on the straw, you realize that true sleep only comes in fragments. You never really sink into an unbroken dream from dusk until dawn. Instead, your eyes open again and again, your mind pulled between fatigue and alertness. This pattern is not unique to you. It belongs to your age, to your time, to everyone in huts just like this one, scattered across the wintry world. One well-documented detail of medieval rest is the pattern of segmented sleep. Instead of one continuous slumber, people would often drift off soon after nightfall, then wake up in the middle of the night for a stretch of quiet wakefulness before returning to a second sleep that would last until dawn. Diaries, sermons, and even medical texts all mention this rhythm as if it were entirely natural. In the absence of artificial light, the darkness itself seemed to shape the body's hours. You can feel it now. After only a few hours under the patchwork quilt, you stir awake. Your eyes are drawn to the faint red glow of the banked embers. Around you, your family shifts as well. Your father coughs softly, your sister rolls over, and your mother stirs just enough to soothe the baby. The hut is alive with subtle movements, half asleep but not entirely. No one speaks loudly. Voices stay hushed, as though the words themselves might break the fragile thread of warmth that is binding everyone together. You sit up slightly, rubbing your eyes, and just listen. Outside, the wind moans through the trees and the snow hisses softly as it drifts from the roof. The night feels eternal, and yet in this pause, you can sense the peculiar intimacy of these hours. They are neither day nor night, but something in between, a time when thoughts wander and fears grow sharper. There's an ongoing debate among modern researchers about why segmented sleep was so common. Some suggest it was dictated by biology, with the human body naturally tuned to wakefulness after a first rest. Others argue it was shaped by necessity. Fires needed tending, animals needed checking, and dangers had to be kept at bay. Whatever the cause, this rhythm gave the nights a strange duality, half dreams and half waking, both shaping life inside the hut. You remember your father telling you stories during these quiet hours. They weren't long tales meant for the whole family, but whispered fragments passed from a parent to a child in the dark. Legends of saints who had braved icy mountains, of villagers who had outsmarted wolves, of spirits who prowled on snowbound nights. The stories weren't just for entertainment. They soothed your restless mind and turned fear into something manageable, even if only for a little while. Sometimes these midnight hours were practical. Your mother might rise quietly to mend a torn hem by the faint glow of the embers, her fingers quick and skilled. Or she might prepare some dough, ready to be baked when the dawn finally arrived. Neighbors, too, used this time. Some accounts describe villagers visiting each other between their first and second sleep, sharing ale, prayers, or hushed conversations. The night, though dangerous, also carried its own social rhythm. You shift again on the straw, listening to your siblings' breathing. They too stir in their sleep, scratching at their woolen blankets, muttering in half-dream voices. The closeness of the bodies ensures that no one ever sleeps entirely undisturbed. A sneeze, a cough, the shifting of straw, it all ripples through the nest, pulling one person awake as another dozes off. Sleep becomes not an individual act, but a communal pattern, woven together like the threads of your patched quilt. You think of how strange this might seem to someone from centuries ahead, someone used to quiet rooms and electric lamps. To them, Waking up at midnight might feel like restlessness or even an illness. But here in your hut, it is simply the way of things. The night itself is too long to endure without some kind of interruption. Breaking it in half gives it a rhythm and makes it survivable. One odd habit that was whispered among villagers was the use of these hours for prayer. Some believed that the soul was most open to heaven in the middle of the night, when the world was hushed. Kneeling before the hearth, clasping their hands in the smoky darkness, they would ask the saints for protection against frost, wolves, or sickness. Perhaps you have done the same thing once or twice, whispering words that rose into the smoke curling toward the rafters. Experts continue to puzzle over how this segmented sleep shaped medieval psychology. Did the wakeful hours encourage deeper dreams? Did they foster creativity, quiet reflection, or even mystical visions? In sermons and confessions, people spoke of temptations and visions that came in the midnight pause, as though the boundary between waking and dreaming had blurred. You lean back against the wall now, staring at the faint shimmer of frost above you. The silence is thick, broken only by the faint snore of your father and the occasional rustle of the pig in its corner. The air is still smoky but less suffocating than it was before, with the embers breathing quietly under their ash blanket. This is the time for thoughts, for wondering, for listening to your own heartbeat echo in the hush. Then slowly, the rhythm of sleep reclaims you. Your eyelids droop, your body softens, and you ease back down into the straw. Around you, the others do the same. One by one, your family settles again into their second sleep, drifting into dreams that will carry you all until the morning. The segmented night, strange to some, feels perfectly natural to you. The cold remains, but the broken sleep has become a kind of shield, a way of surviving the endless winter hours, one fragment at a time. And as you surrender once more, you realize that this rhythm, wake, rest, mirrors the very cycle of survival itself. Never perfect, never seamless, but always enduring, carrying you from one fragile dawn to the next. You jolt slightly at a sound from beyond the wall, a long, low howl that threads its way through the wind. Your first thought is of wolves. Your second is of raiders. Neither one is comforting. For a moment, you hold your breath, straining to listen, while your heart quickens its pace under the blanket. Out here, in a wooden hut on the edge of winter's grip, the night carries more than just the cold. It carries danger. Contemporary chronicles make it clear that wolves were a constant concern in medieval Europe. The harsh winters drove them closer to the villages, their hunger pushing them to stalk livestock and, on the most desperate nights, even children. Tales abounded of travelers who vanished on snowy paths, their fate marked only by tracks that led into the forest. And though the truth may have been less dramatic than the stories, the fear was very real. Wolves were not mythical monsters. They were predators with teeth and hunger, and the flimsy walls of a wooden hut offered very little defense. You tighten your blanket around your shoulders, peering into the shadows where your siblings sleep, completely unaware. Your father stirs too, lifting his head as though he heard the same sound. He doesn't rise, he just listens, his hand resting on the staff he always keeps near the door. The silence that follows is heavier than the howl itself, stretching out until you wonder if you might have imagined it. Then the wind picks up, whistling through the cracks in the wall, and the sound dissolves into its roar. One odd superstition that was often repeated around village fires was that wolves could be kept at bay by hanging sprigs of juniper or iron charms above the door. Whether it was effective or not, such rituals gave families a sense of control against forces that were far beyond their power. You remember your mother tying a bundle of herbs to the hut's main beam last winter, her hands steady, though her eyes betrayed her own deep unease. There's an ongoing scholarly disagreement about how frequent raids by bandits or hostile neighbors truly were during the winter. Some argue that the harsh weather deterred most attackers, while others point to records of burned villages and stolen food stores as evidence that hunger made men just as dangerous as wolves. Whatever the statistics were, the fear ran deep enough to haunt the dreams of those who slept in huts like yours. Every creak in the timbers, every gust of wind against the roof, could be a warning of footsteps in the snow. You shift uneasily, your ears tuned to the sounds of the night. The hut groans as the wind presses against it, the beams creaking like old voices. A chicken flutters its wings suddenly, startled by the noise, and the goat bleats softly on its tether. The pig, however, sleeps on, a lump of warmth, indifferent to any dangers beyond the walls. You exhale slowly, reminding yourself that animals often sense threats first, so if they are resting easy, perhaps you can too. Yet your imagination refuses to quiet down. You picture wolves circling just outside, their paws pressing into the fresh snow, their breath steaming in the cold air. You picture raiders with their cloaks pulled tight, their eyes gleaming under their helmets, seeking food, fire, or something worse. The thin door between you and them feels as flimsy as parchment. In truth, it is nothing more than a wooden plank that's been braced with a heavy stone. One story your grandmother told comes back to you now, of a family so poor that they invited their pig into the bedding heap each night. And one winter, the pig's squeals saved them from wolves that had tried to break through the door. Whether it was true or not, the story is retold because it carries the message that survival often depends on the most unlikely allies. You reach out and rest your hand on the fur of the goat beside you, feeling its steady warmth. Perhaps that story wasn't so far-fetched after all. Modern researchers often debate how much of the medieval fear was based on reality, and how much of it was magnified by folklore. Was the wolf population truly overwhelming, or did their occasional presence just loom larger in the imagination? Were raids a daily threat, or were they rare but terrifying enough to scar the memory for generations? The evidence is fragmented, leaving plenty of room for interpretation. But for you lying here right now, the distinction hardly matters. Fear feels real when you hear a howl in the dark. The silence stretches out again, broken only by the slow, steady breathing of your family. Your father settles back down, apparently satisfied that the threat has passed, but you remain tense, your ears straining for another sound. The hut seems smaller, tighter, with danger pressing in at its edges. And yet, you know that this is just a part of life. The nights are never free of unease. You draw the blanket tighter still, tucking it under your chin, and remind yourself that this moment is not unique. Generations before you have lain in similar huts, hearing similar howls and clutching similar blankets. The fear of what lurks beyond the wooden walls is woven into the very fabric of winter life, as much a part of survival as fire or food. Gradually, exhaustion begins to soften your edges. Your mind dulls. Your body sinks into the straw once more. The wolves may circle and the raiders may wander, but the hut still stands, its walls holding firm against the storm. You let your eyes close, whispering a half-formed prayer into the smoky dark. Protection, warmth, survival, these are all you ask for. And as your breath slows, you surrender once more to an uneasy sleep, fragile but enduring in the heart of winter's ever-present threat. The night presses on, and though the howls have faded, the cold creeps steadily upward from the floor. You curl tighter into your cloak, shifting on the straw to find even the smallest patch of warmth. The ground itself feels alive with the chill, as though the earth beneath the hut is exhaling frost right into your bones. Without some protection, no one could rest here for long. Contemporary accounts confirm that medieval sleepers rarely lay directly on the earthen floor. Instead, they layered straw, hay, reeds, or rushes to create a barrier between their bodies and the icy ground. This was the peasant's mattress, humble, scratchy, and temporary, but absolutely essential. Even the thinnest layer of plant matter made the difference between a tolerable cold and a bone-deep agony. You shift again and feel the uneven surface beneath you. The straw pricks your skin where the blanket has slipped aside, its texture rough but completely familiar. Some of the stalks have flattened under weeks of use, leaving very little insulation. Others still hold small pockets of air, keeping you slightly lifted above the damp earth. It isn't comfortable, not like the feather beds that the lords boasted of, but it is enough to survive. One odd practice that villagers sometimes followed was mixing animal hides into their bedding. Freshly cleaned sheepskins or deerskins laid fur side up provided a warmth that straw alone could never provide. You remember the nights when your father returned from the hunt with a hide still smelling of the forest, stretched out beneath your family. The fur tickled your legs, but it trapped the heat, and everyone crowded closer to it. A single skin felt like a treasure in the middle of winter. Experts haven't reached a consensus on how frequently this bedding was changed or replaced. Some argue that the straw pallets were renewed every few weeks, while others suggest that families stretched them through an entire season, no matter how filthy they became. Archaeological remains of rushes pressed deep into house floors suggest both possibilities, depending on a family's wealth and diligence. In truth, you know that once the snow falls and the fields lie buried, gathering fresh straw is no easy task. Families just have to endure the stench and the itch until spring finally arrives. You scratch at your arm, half in a dream and half in irritation. Fleas live in the straw, biting at any exposed skin. They are as much a part of the night as the smoke or the hunger. Your sister stirs beside you, slapping at her leg before rolling over with a groan. You wonder how anyone ever manages to sleep fully with such constant discomfort. But then again, what choice do you really have? Fatigue is stronger than irritation, and exhaustion always wins in the end. The smell of the bedding is heavy, too. The straw absorbs everything: sweat, spilled ale, spilled milk, the musk of animals. Over the weeks, the odor becomes dense, mingling with the smoke and damp wood until it seems to cling to your very skin. And yet, you can't imagine trying to sleep without it. A bare floor would freeze you. And fancier mattresses are just dreams for nobles and priests, not for families in huts like yours. You think of those nobles, tucked into wooden frames raised high above the floor, lying on thick mattresses stuffed with feathers, wool, or down. Curtains would be drawn around the bed to hold the warmth in. Servants would be there to fetch fresh rushes and perfumes to mask any odors. Their world feels like another universe entirely. Here, your mattress is shared. Its stuffing is both a gift and a burden, but it is yours. Sometimes villagers tried to improve the pallet with little tricks that were passed down through the generations. One was to place warmed stones beneath the straw, wrapped in cloth so they wouldn't scorch anything. Another was to add layers of bracken fern, whose stiff leaves helped to keep the dampness at bay. These little innovations gave brief relief, though they were never a perfect solution. You can picture your grandmother showing you how to arrange the fern leaves in a crisscross pattern, explaining that they lasted longer than straw, her wrinkled hands moving with a practiced ease. There's a debate among social historians about whether peasants truly minded their humble bedding. Some argue that people just grew used to the discomfort, their standards simply being different from ours. Others suggest that they longed constantly for something better, envying the lords whose sleep was cushioned and sweet-smelling. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps they envied and endured in equal measure. You lie still, your ear pressed close to the bedding, and you listen. The straw whispers faintly as your sister shifts, a sound like dry grass in the summer. You can hear mice scuttling somewhere beneath, bold enough to claim any scraps that fell from supper. The earth smells faintly of mildew where the snow seeped in near the door, reminding you that no barrier is ever perfect. And yet, despite everything, the fleas, the stench, the uneven lumps, you begin to understand the comfort that is hidden in this bed. It is not the softness that soothes you, but the familiarity. Every stalk, every rustle, every prickle has been with you night after night, binding you to your family and to this place. This is not a bed of luxury, but of belonging. Your eyes grow heavy again, your body surrendering to the crude embrace of the straw and hides. You sigh, adjusting your cloak so that no patch of skin is exposed to the draft around you. The others shift too, every movement reshaping the communal mattress beneath you all. It is noisy, lumpy, and imperfect, but it is warm enough, secure enough, and yours enough to let sleep take you once more. And so, in the wooden hut, on straw layered thin against the frozen ground, you close your eyes, carried into dreams not by comfort, but by endurance, by necessity, and by the shared warmth of survival. The hut hums with noises that never seem to stop. You lie awake for a moment, not because of the cold this time, but because your ears have caught the layered chorus of the night. It is never truly silent here. The sounds shift and overlap, weaving themselves into the fragile fabric of your sleep. Some of them soothe you, others unsettle you, but all of them remind you that the hut is alive. Written descriptions from the period emphasize how constant sound was in medieval homes. Thin walls, open hearths, and shared living spaces meant there was no separation between one life and another. Privacy was almost completely unknown. You could hear every cough, every rustle, every murmur. At night, this intimacy became even more obvious. Sleep was not an isolated silence, but a communal soundscape. You listen closely now. The timbers creak above your head, stretched and bent by the sheer weight of the snow. The roof shifts with faint cracks, like the joints in an old man's knees. In the corner, your father snores in long, steady rumbles, broken by the occasional cough as the smoke irritates his lungs. Your mother breathes more lightly, her breath as soft as the sigh of fabric. Beside you, your sister mutters in her sleep, her words half-formed and completely unintelligible. One detail that has been preserved in travelers' diaries is how striking the nighttime chorus was when they visited peasant homes. Outsiders, unused to the crowded arrangements, wrote of restless bodies, shared snores, whispered dreams, and the constant scuttle of vermin. For you born into it, the sound is no more unusual than the wind in the trees. You know each noise by heart. You can even identify which one of your siblings kicks in their sleep, and which one breathes like a bellows. A curious habit sometimes mentioned in village law was the belief that a noisy sleeper was safer than a silent one. If someone's breathing grew too quiet, family members would nudge them awake, fearing that the silence meant death had crept into the hut. You remember your mother bending over your brother one night, shaking him gently until he groaned in irritation, and only then relaxing with relief at the sound. Experts continue to debate whether medieval people slept more lightly because of these constant interruptions, or whether their bodies simply adapted to rest in shorter, shallower cycles. Some argue that chronic fatigue was common, explaining why peasants often took naps during the daylight hours. Others believe that the body simply adjusted, learning to rest even amid the snores, coughs, and creaking walls. The truth may lie somewhere in between, never fully rested, yet resilient enough to endure. The sounds from outside the hut join the chorus inside. The wind wails through the gaps, sometimes sounding eerily like voices. Snow slides off the thatch with muffled thumps. In the distance, a dog barks, someone else in the village keeping watch, or perhaps answering a howl from deeper in the woods. These noises seep into your half-dreams, turning them into strange stories. In one moment you dream of storms and collapsing beams, in another of wolves scratching at the door. Yet not all the sounds are fearful. Some are oddly comforting. The crackle of a log as it flares up in the embers reassures you that warmth still breathes in the hearth. The soft grunt of the pig nearby, the flutter of the hens settling on their perch, the rhythmic chewing of the goat, all of these tell you that life endures. They are lullabies of survival, each one anchoring you to the present moment. You shift on the straw, adjusting your ears to the quieter noises. The faint scratch of a mouse near the food stores, the drip of melted snow sneaking through the roof into a wooden bucket. These are reminders of the hut's fragility. It is not a fortress, not a palace, just a temporary shelter patched together with whatever materials could be found. Its voice is full of leaks and scratches and creaks. And yet, to you, it is home. Sometimes the night brings unexpected music. You remember evenings when your mother would hum to soothe the children, her low voice blending with the hiss of the wind. Or when your father, restless in his segmented sleep, would whisper prayers to the saints, the words muffled but steady. Even now, if you strain your ears, you can hear your sister singing softly in her dream, a half-remembered lullaby. These fragile threads of melody float in the smoky air, offering a small comfort against the cold. Some scholars argue that this constant soundscape shaped medieval memory and imagination. Without silence, dreams and waking life would blur, influenced by every creak and cough. The folklore of spirits and omens may have been seeded in these nights, when a groan of timber was mistaken for a phantom's cry or a snore for a whispered warning. To live in such sound was to live in a world where reality and imagination were constantly mingling. You pull the blanket tighter, letting the noises wash over you. They are distracting, yes, but they are also reassuring. Every sound means something: life, movement, protection, survival. Silence would be far worse. Silence would mean the fire has died, the animals have frozen, the family has stopped breathing. Noise is the proof of endurance. Your eyelids grow heavy as the hut continues its restless song. The chorus does not stop. You know it never will. But gradually it becomes just background noise, steady and predictable. Like a lullaby, it guides you back into slumber. You surrender your last thought, a simple one: that this crowded, noisy hut, with all of its imperfections, holds the fragile symphony of life against the brutal winter that rages outside. Your stomach grumbles, faint but insistent, tugging you from the edge of your second sleep. Hunger is another companion in the winter, almost as constant as the cold itself. You open your eyes and see the faint outline of your mother moving near the hearth. She lifts a small loaf from a cloth and breaks it into pieces, handing one to your father first, then to each child who stirs awake. Accounts from the Middle Ages tell us that simple food before bed was a common custom, not for luxury, but for survival. Bread crusts, porridge, or a sip of warm ale would settle the stomach, easing the discomfort and making it easier to sleep through the long, freezing night. Without this small ritual, hunger would gnaw too fiercely, disturbing your rest and leaving your body weaker by morning. You chew slowly on your piece of bread, the crust hard from days of storage. It tastes faintly sour, the way bread often did when it was made with rough ground grains and sourdough starters. The dryness sticks in your throat, but you wash it down with a swallow of thin ale that your mother presses into your hand. The liquid is warm from sitting near the embers. Its taste is bitter, but strangely soothing. You can feel a faint heat spread through your chest, dulling both the chill and the hunger. Travelers' diaries sometimes remark on how little variety peasants had in their nighttime meals. Unlike the nobles, who dined late with roasted meats and sweetened wines, families in huts like yours made do with whatever was at hand. Often it was the same bread and ale, repeated endlessly. Yet even that monotony was a comfort. Hunger did not demand flavor, it demanded substance. One curious practice recorded in rural villages was warming stones in the fire and then placing small pots of thin broth beside them so that the liquid would stay warm until bedtime. The families would then sip the broth like medicine, savoring the steam as much as the taste. You can imagine such a scene right here. Your sister cupping her hands around the pot, her eyes closing in relief as the warmth fogs her face. Scholars remain divided over how nutritious these nighttime meals truly were. Some argue that the ale, low in alcohol and rich in calories, gave peasants vital energy. Others point out that diluted gruel and hard bread did little to replenish the exhaustion of winter labor. Whatever the truth is, you know the comfort that it brings you now. Your belly no longer aches so sharply, and your mind grows a little calmer. The smell of the food, as faint as it is, fills the hut. The smoke mixes with the sour tang of the ale, the earthy scent of the bread, and the faint sweetness of dried onions that your mother sometimes added to the dough. These aromas, though humble, feel luxurious compared to the bitter odor of straw and dung that dominates most of the hours. For a moment, as you swallow the last bite, you feel warmed from within, not just from without. Your father takes his sip last, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He mutters a quiet thanks, not to anyone in particular, perhaps to the saints, perhaps to the grain, perhaps simply to life itself. This ritual of eating together, even if it's only scraps, binds the family as surely as the straw pallet does. It is a reminder that although resources are meager, they are shared. You settle back onto the bedding, pulling the blanket close again. Your stomach feels steadier, your head light with the warmth of the ale. Hunger is not gone. It never is in winter, but it has been softened enough for sleep to return. You think of how many nights before this one have followed the exact same pattern. The fire dwindling, the embers banked, the bread shared, the bodies huddled. Each repetition weaves endurance into a routine. Oddly, dreams come easier on a full stomach. You recall once dreaming of a feast, with tables piled high with roasted meats, sweet cakes dripping with honey, and pitchers of wine. You woke with your mouth watering and your belly aching worse than ever. Tonight, you hope for gentler dreams. Fields of grain in the summer, the smell of baking bread carried on warm breezes. Perhaps the mind, like the body, clings to nourishment in whatever form it can find. Experts who study medieval diets often highlight how the winter forced people into scarcity. Fresh vegetables were gone. Meat was rare unless it had been salted or smoked, and dairy was limited when the animals produced less in the cold. The nighttime meals, therefore, were not feasts, but rationed scraps. Yet even scraps served a deeper purpose. They were a psychological comfort, proof that the family would not have to face the night entirely empty. You lick the last crumbs from your fingers, tasting the sourness of the bread one more time. Your sister burrows against your side, sighing in relief after she has had her share. The pig grunts in the corner, perhaps jealous of the food, perhaps only dreaming. The hut settles down again, the sounds softening, the warmth of the hearth mingling with the warmth of full bellies. As you drift off, you realize that food at night is more than just sustenance. It is ritual, reassurance, and memory. It anchors the body to the present and the soul to the hope that tomorrow there will still be bread, still be ale, still be enough to share. And with that thought, you close your eyes, your hunger dulled, your mind eased, and your body finally willing to surrender once again to the embrace of winter sleep. The bread has eased your stomach, and the ale has warmed your chest, but the night remains long, and your thoughts drift toward forces that are less visible than wolves or hunger. In the flickering darkness, whispers seem to stir, of spirits and demons that lurk in the cold. You shiver, not only from the draft that slips through the cracks in the wall, but from the stories you've heard since you were a child, tales that make the winter nights more haunting than any predator ever could. Medieval writings reveal that people filled the gaps in their knowledge with superstition, especially when it came to explaining the dangers of winter. When a family froze to death despite having a fire, when sickness swept through a hut, or when animals died mysteriously, many believed that frost demons or wandering spirits were to blame. These unseen forces were said to prowl in the darkest hours, slipping in through the gaps in the walls or down the chimney hole, feeding on breath and warmth. You remember your grandmother telling you about the frost hag, a crooked figure who was said to wander from hut to hut, placing her icy fingers on sleeping children's faces. If the fire burned too low, the child would not wake by morning. To ward her off, families would sometimes leave iron scissors on the threshold or a sprig of juniper above the door. Your mother still follows that practice, tucking a charm into the rafters with a quiet determination. One curious belief that lingers in your mind is the use of whispered chants before bed. Some households recited the same phrases every single night, not unlike prayers, asking the saints to guard them from the night fiends. You've heard your father murmur such words under his breath, his voice low and gravelly, as though he feared being overheard by the very things he was trying to repel. Whether the words had any power or not, they gave the family a sense of control in a world that was full of uncertainty. Historians continue to question how seriously peasants actually held to these superstitions. Some argue that their faith in charms was absolute, shaping their daily rituals and choices. Others suggest it was more of a cultural habit, repeated simply because it felt wrong not to. But lying here in the smoky dark, hearing the hut creak as if it were alive, you can understand why people clung to the idea of unseen protectors. The world outside is too vast, too hostile to face without a belief in something watching over you. You glance up at the rafters, seeing the frost sparkle faintly where the moonlight slips through a crack. The sight makes you pull the blanket even tighter. It feels as though eyes might be peering through that gap, watching you silently. Your sister stirs beside you, muttering a prayer in her half-dream, and you wonder if her dreams, too, are haunted by these stories. Children absorb them deeply, carrying the fears of their elders into their own restless sleep. At times, superstitions even shaped how people positioned themselves in bed. Families would sometimes place the children in the middle of the sleeping heap, believing that the outer edges were more vulnerable to spirits or cold demons. You can feel that protection now, pressed between your sister and your brother, their small bodies acting as barriers against both the frost and the fear. Your parents lie at the edges, shielding you, their warmth and their very presence acting as charms in themselves. One odd tidbit from folk practices mentions that some people would smear salt around the door frame, believing it formed a barrier against evil. You recall seeing this once in a neighbor's hut, a faint crust of white sprinkled deliberately, as if it were armor. Salt was precious, but so was peace of mind. You can imagine the family sleeping easier that night, not because the salt had any real power, but because they believed that it did. Experts have long noted how thin the line was between religion and superstition in these practices. A prayer to a saint might blend seamlessly with a charm of iron or a muttered spell inherited from pagan roots. In the smoky dark of the winter huts, there was little room for theological debate. Anything that promised safety was welcome. You let your eyes close, whispering a small phrase you've heard countless times. Keep the frost away. Keep the fire awake. The words are simple, childish perhaps, but they carry a rhythm that soothes you. Your breathing slows, and though the fear of unseen visitors lingers at the edge of your mind, the charm comforts you enough to drift off again. The hut groans once more, the wind hisses against the roof, and you imagine for a fleeting second that the frost hag herself is passing by. But you are tucked within the warmth, shielded by your family, guarded by the fire hidden under the ash. Whatever lurks outside will find no entrance here tonight. And with that, you slip once more into an uneasy sleep, wrapped not only in blankets but in layers of belief, hope, and whispered charms. Proof that even in the darkest winters, people clung to their stories as tightly as they clung to life itself. The hut is hushed again, but this silence carries its own kind of weight. You roll slightly on the straw, listening not for wolves or spirits, but for something much subtler, the absence of chatter. Everyone has fallen still, and the air feels as fragile as if words themselves might shatter it. Medieval diaries and court records hint that many families observed an unspoken rule of quiet during the long winter nights. Whispered conversations were acceptable, but loud voices were rare. Talking too much was seen as wasting breath in the smoky air, and raising your voice risked disturbing the careful balance of rest. In a hut where 10 or more bodies sometimes shared a single space, silence was a survival tactic. You can feel it now, that restraint. The way your parents' murmurs fade away quickly. The way the children are hushed with just a soft touch. There is no need to explain it. It is simply understood. The words will wait for daylight. The night belongs to listening, to conserving, to enduring. One curious note in monastic writings observes that silence itself was believed to preserve strength. Just as fasting was thought to strengthen the soul, holding one's tongue at night was thought to preserve the body's warmth. Whether it was superstition or practical wisdom, the rule carried weight. You can almost hear your grandmother's voice repeating, "Still tongues, warm bones." Scholarly voices remain divided on whether this nighttime quiet was universally practiced, or if it was only observed in some communities. Some argue that large households would have been too noisy, while others insist that villagers valued peace deeply in the hours of rest. Yet here in your hut, the silence settles like another blanket, tucking everyone into the same shared rhythm. You shift and hear the faintest rustle of straw beneath you. That small sound feels almost scandalous, as though it has broken the pact. Your sister sighs in her sleep, and your mother adjusts the baby's position with great care. But even these movements are soft, deliberately muted. No one wants to pierce the fragile calm. The hut itself seems to honor the rule. The fire smolders quietly, its embers hidden under the ash, their glow faint but steady. The wind outside has eased, replaced by the muffled hush of snow falling. The timbers creak only occasionally, as though even the wood understands that the hour demands restraint. You find yourself reflecting on how unusual this quiet is compared to the daytime. In the daylight hours, the hut is loud, with children playing, animals bleating, parents arguing, and tools clattering. The contrast makes the night's silence feel almost sacred, a time when the world presses pause. Even the hunger and the fear seem softer in these still hours. One odd custom that was recorded in village chronicles was the belief that whispering at night could call unwanted attention from wandering spirits. Some families forbade any talk at all once the fire was banked, fearing that their voices might attract something that was lurking in the dark. Whether you believe it or not, you've noticed how quickly your father hushes any conversation once the embers have dimmed. It's less about a faith in spirits and more about a respect for tradition, and perhaps a respect for fear itself. Experts suggest that such enforced quiet may have shaped medieval sleep more than we realize. Without words to distract them, people's minds turned inward, leading to vivid dreams, reflections, and even mystical experiences. Sermons from the time describe people claiming to hear divine voices in the middle of the night, but perhaps it was only their own thoughts echoing louder in the absence of sound. You pull the blanket up to your chin, the silence pressing in closer. At first, it feels heavy, but then it becomes soothing. Without the chatter, your own breathing seems louder, steadier. The hush allows you to hear the smaller sounds, the crackle of straw under your sister's elbow, the faint drip of water into a bucket, the flutter of a hen's wing. These tiny noises become the night's lullaby, gentle and unobtrusive. Gradually, you understand why the silence was so treasured. It isn't only about conserving breath or keeping the peace. It is about creating space for survival itself, to rest, to listen, to endure. Words are heavy, silence is light. And in the winter, every ounce of energy matters. You close your eyes, sinking into the hush. The quiet stretches out, wrapping around you like wool. Soon, even your thoughts begin to fade, dissolving into the smoky darkness. Silence is not emptiness, it is shelter. And in its embrace, you drift once more into slumber, trusting that the night will carry you gently toward the dawn. A faint murmur breaks the silence. It isn't a warning or a quarrel, it's a lullaby. Your eyes open just enough to catch the glow of the embers reflected on your mother's face as she hums softly, rocking the baby in her arms. The tune is low and repetitive, more of a vibration than a melody, yet it threads its way through the smoky air like a single thread of warmth. Historical records and folklore collections suggest that lullabies were deeply embedded in medieval culture. They weren't polished songs meant for performance, but simple, often improvised chants designed to calm restless children and steady weary adults. The repetition, the soothing rhythm, the familiar words, all of it worked like a charm against fear and restlessness. You listen now, recognizing the melody, though it has no real name. It's the same one you've heard since your own childhood, sung on countless nights when storms raged or wolves howled. It speaks not of grand adventures, but of everyday hopes, that the fire will hold, that the snow will soften, that the family will wake up whole in the morning. One detail recorded in village traditions is how these songs often carried small warnings, tucked gently into the verses. A mother might sing about frost spirits being kept away by the saints, or about children who needed to stay under their blankets lest the cold snatch them away. The lullaby soothed, but it also taught. You can hear that now as your mother's words drift in and out, a reminder not to stir from the bedding, not to fear the shadows, to stay safe in sleep's embrace. Researchers remain divided on whether these songs were purely functional or if they carried a deeper, ritual meaning. Some argue they were just practical tools used to quiet down the children. Others suggest they held a spiritual significance, weaving superstition and faith into the nightly routines. Listening here, you feel that both explanations ring true. The song is practical, it calms your brother's squirming, but it also feels like a prayer, soft and unbroken. Your sister shifts beside you, her eyes fluttering as she half wakes. Then she sighs and sinks back into slumber, lulled as much by the sound as by the warmth of the bedding. Even you, older now, feel its pull. The melody is like smoke curling around the rafters, wrapping the entire hut in a cocoon. One curious tidbit noted in folk records is that lullabies were sometimes sung not only for the children, but also for the livestock. Shepherds would croon to their lambs, and farmers to their calves, believing that the gentle sound eased both beasts and humans. You can imagine your mother humming the same tune out in the barnyard, soothing the goats as easily as she soothes her own children. In a world where survival bound people and animals so closely together, music was a bridge of comfort. The hut seems to change as the song continues. The creaks of the beams, the sighs of the sleepers, the distant howl of the wind, they all seem to fall into rhythm with the melody. The world feels smaller and safer, as though the song itself is guarding the doorway against the cold and the fear. Even the baby, who was once restless, stills completely, his tiny breath sinking into the same cadence. Experts point out that these lullabies often carried melancholy undertones, reflecting the hardships of life. Unlike modern songs of pure sweetness, medieval lullabies sometimes spoke of hunger, death, or the endless winter. Yet paradoxically, these darker notes provided a kind of comfort. Numbing the hardships gave them a form, and giving them a form made them easier to face. Your mother's tune carries this very duality. It is tender but edged with sorrow, reminding you that survival is never guaranteed, but it is always pursued. You close your eyes again, letting the sound flow through you. The rough straw beneath you, the smoky air, the cold pressing at the walls, they all fade slightly under the weight of the melody. The lullaby is a thread that connects the generations. Your grandmother sang it, your mother sings it, and someday perhaps you will too. The baby sighs once more, then falls into a deep, even breathing. Your mother hums a final verse and then falls silent, laying her head back against the wall. The hut returns to its layered quiet, but something has changed. The silence is no longer heavy. It has been softened, blessed by the song, warmed by the memory of the music. You drift again, held by the echoes of a voice that has soothed countless nights. In the middle of a brutal winter, with frost at the door and hunger in your belly, you are carried to sleep not by comfort, not by safety, but by the fragile, enduring strength of a mother's lullaby. The hush returns once your mother's lullaby fades, but now you notice the weight of the blanket pressing down on you. It isn't just fabric, it is history, stitched together in scraps. You shift slightly and feel the seams where one piece of cloth meets another, with patches layered over the years, each square a fragment of some earlier garment or a worn-out tunic. One well-established detail from medieval life is that quilts and heavy coverings were often made from whatever material could be salvaged. Peasant families rarely wasted cloth. Every shred of linen, every scrap of wool, even rags that were too thin for clothing, were sewn together to form coverings. Over the decades, these pieced-together quilts grew heavier, thicker, and oddly beautiful, though not in the polished way of those in noble households. They were living records of survival, with each stitch representing a quiet victory over scarcity. You run your fingers over one square that once belonged to your father's old tunic, the wool rough and faded. Another patch is softer, from a linen shirt that your grandmother wore until it had thinned too much to keep. Near your feet, you can feel a bit of fur that has been crudely sewn into place, its edges uneven but still warmer than the fabric alone. These coverings are more than just warmth. They are memory, layered in cloth. A curious custom sometimes noted in folk traditions was the practice of dyeing patches with natural colors. Onion skins for yellow, walnut husks for brown, and madder root for red, creating quilts that were not only practical but also faintly decorative. You can imagine your mother boiling onion skins in the smoky hut, dipping the cloth to give it a golden tint, and smiling faintly at the brightness it brought to the otherwise gray winters. Experts continue to discuss whether these household textiles should be seen purely as utilitarian objects or as expressions of identity and pride. Some argue that peasants valued them only for their warmth, while others highlight the careful stitches, the dyed patches, and the small attempts at beauty. Holding the blanket close, you suspect that both are true. It is functional, yes, but it is also filled with a quiet artistry, the handiwork of women who stitched hope into every single seam. The quilt carries weight in more ways than one. It is physically heavy, pressing you down into the straw, but it is also emotionally heavy, reminding you of the generations who endured the winters before you. Every patch tells a story, and every repair sends a message. We survived this year, and we will survive the next. You feel a comfort in that continuity, even as the cold nips at the edges. One odd practice that villagers sometimes followed was sewing charms into their quilts, small pieces of bone, beads, or crosses stitched inside where they could not be seen. These hidden tokens were believed to ward off illness or frostbite, to protect the sleepers through the long winters. You wonder now if your mother's quilt holds such secrets, if beneath the seams there lies a sliver of iron or a saint's medal, quietly guarding you as you drift in and out of your dreams. The smell of the quilt is distinct. It is smoky, infused with the hearth's breath, and faintly sour from the sweat that has been absorbed over countless nights. Yet there is also the faint scent of herbs, lavender or sage, that were tucked between its folds during the summer to deter insects. That fragrance still lingers, subtle but comforting, a reminder of warmer days. You pull the covering tighter around you, noticing how your siblings do the same. The weight is shared across all the bodies, binding everyone together beneath its patched expanse. If one person shifts, the others feel it. If one person tugs, the others lose their cover. Sleep, like survival, requires cooperation. Scholars note how these textiles often became heirlooms, passed down from a mother to her daughter. Even peasants with little else of value cherished their blankets and quilts as symbols of endurance. You think of how this quilt, as heavy and patched as it is, might someday wrap your own children. The thought steadies you, giving the night a thread of continuity that is stronger than fear or hunger. The embers are still glowing faintly, their light catching on the quilt's seams, casting them in relief. You trace one with your fingertip until your eyes close. The weight of the cloth, the memory, and the care presses you deeper into the straw. It isn't a luxury, but it is love in fabric form, and in that love you find warmth. Soon, sleep overtakes you again, heavy and thick with dreams, cradled by the patched heritage cloth that has sheltered generations before you, and will surely shelter more to come. You stir in the straw and you hear it before you feel it, the wet, heavy cough of your father. It rattles through the dark, heavy and raw, followed by the wheeze of his breath. The sound pulls you fully awake, because illness in the winter is no small matter. Here in this cramped hut, where the air is smoky and damp, sickness spreads much faster than warmth. Contemporary medical records and chronicles often describe how the winter brought a wave of ailments. The cold, damp conditions aggravated the lungs, the smoke irritated the throats, and the cramped sleeping arrangements could spread fevers in a matter of days. Even something as small as a cough could spiral into a weakness that might linger for the entire season. In an age without antibiotics, recovery was always uncertain, and sleep itself often became both a remedy and a risk. You shift uneasily, pulling the blanket tighter. Your mother stirs too, placing her hand on your father's shoulder, whispering words you can't quite make out. He nods faintly, curling closer to the fire's faint glow. The hut smells thicker now, not only of smoke and straw, but of sickness, a sharp, sour tang that clings to the breath. One peculiar remedy that was sometimes employed in huts like yours was the use of onions or garlic placed beneath pillows or tied around the neck. People believed that the pungent scent would draw the sickness out, absorbing the bad air. You can picture a string of garlic dangling above your father, its smell overwhelming but oddly reassuring. In truth, you're not sure if it cures anything, but the act of doing something brings a small comfort. Some researchers argue that the smoky huts themselves weaken people's bodies, filling their lungs with soot and aggravating respiratory illnesses. Others counter that the very same smoke might have killed bacteria and preserved food, indirectly protecting the families. The evidence is conflicting, but here in the hut, there is no debate. Your father's cough proves that the air is both a lifeline and a burden. You notice your younger brother turning in his sleep, his forehead glistening slightly even in the dim ember light. Is it just the heat of being buried under all these bodies, or is it the first sign of a fever? You press your hand gently against his skin, your heart fluttering with worry. Your mother does the same, her expression unreadable, but her touch lingering longer than yours did. Illness shapes dreams, too. You remember nights when you shivered uncontrollably, the sweat soaking your shift despite the cold air. The fever carried you into visions of endless snowfields, of wolves with glowing eyes, of a fire that crackled but gave no warmth. Waking from such dreams felt like being dragged back from another world entirely. Tonight, you pray that your father's cough doesn't carry him into such visions. One curious practice that villagers sometimes followed was heating stones in the fire, wrapping them in cloth, and placing them near the sick to ease their shivering. You can imagine your mother doing this tomorrow if the cough worsens, her hands moving with the quiet urgency of someone who has seen too many winters claim too many lives. Scholars note that medieval people often saw sleep itself as a form of medicine. Physicians wrote that rest balances the humors and gives the body time to recover. Yet, when the huts are crowded and noisy, true rest is rare. You wonder how much recovery can really happen when coughing, snoring, and the shifting of straw wake you up again and again. Still, there is no other cure. There is only sleep, warmth, prayer, and hope. The hush settles again after your father's cough subsides. You lie awake, listening for more, your nerves tense. The baby whimpers briefly, then quiets down. Your mother whispers a prayer, her lips moving silently in the ember light. You close your eyes and echo it in your thoughts, hoping that the saints, or perhaps simply the resilience of the body, will carry your family through another night. The cold presses in closer as though it is testing the hut's defenses. Your father shifts, groaning softly, but then his breathing steadies, deeper now, more rhythmic. You allow yourself a sigh of relief, though the unease still lingers. In this world, survival is fragile, and every cough is a reminder of how thin the line is between endurance and collapse. You bury yourself deeper under the patched quilt, your nose filled with smoke, your ears alert for the next cough. Sleep does not come easily, but eventually exhaustion claims you. And as you drift off, you understand that illness is as much a part of the winter nights as the frost or the hunger. It is another shadow in the smoky dark, hovering over every breath, every dream, and every fragile heartbeat. Your sleep, when it finally comes, is restless. The hunger hums at the edge of your belly, and the smoke curls in your lungs, shaping your dreams into strange and jagged visions. You drift into a half-world where the winter and your waking life blur together, where every sound and smell transforms into something uncanny. Manuscripts and personal accounts suggest that medieval people often describe their dreams in vivid, almost mystical detail. Hunger could twist ordinary visions into nightmares. The smoke could conjure phantoms from the haze. Dreams were not seen as random illusions, but as meaningful signs, messages from God, warnings of spirits, or reflections of one's moral state. You can feel that truth now as your own dream unfolds. In it, the hut is vast, its rafters soaring like the arches of a great church, yet they are still blackened by smoke. The fire glows far too bright, its embers pulsing like living eyes. You wander through this space, your feet crunching on straw that seems to whisper your name. The air is thick, heavy with the same smell you breathe each night, smoke, sweat, and the sourness of empty stomachs, only it's magnified into something oppressive, almost alive. One curious belief among villagers was that dreams caused by hunger were prophetic. An empty stomach, they thought, left the soul lighter, freer to wander. If you dreamed of bread, it meant a good harvest was coming. If you dreamed of meat, it promised strength in the year ahead. You smile faintly in your sleep, because even now, scraps of food are drifting through your vision. Loaves of bread steaming with an impossible freshness, pots of stew that never seem to empty. You reach out for them, but they just dissolve into smoke. Experts still discuss how much dreams actually influenced medieval decision-making. Some argue they guided everything from planting crops to settling disputes, while others insist that most peasants saw them as fleeting entertainment and nothing more. But lying here, twitching in your sleep, you can sense why they carried such weight. In a world with so little certainty, dreams offered a kind of direction, even if it was illusory. Your dream shifts again. Wolves are howling outside, their cries stretching into the wind. Only this time, when you turn toward the door, you see not beasts, but shadows seeping in through the cracks in the walls. They twist like smoke, sliding silently across the floor. You clutch the blanket tighter, even in your sleep, your breath quickening. Perhaps it is a fever that is shaping this vision, or perhaps it is only the imagination of a hungry child. But in this hut, with its smoky rafters and groaning beams, such dreams feel less like a fantasy and more like a continuation of your waking fear. One odd tidbit that has been preserved in sermons is that priests would sometimes warn against sinful dreams, claiming they revealed the corruption of the soul. Others, more kindly, told the villagers to ignore dreams that were caused by cold or hunger, calling them just tricks of the body, not messages from heaven. This contradiction only deepened the mystery. Which dreams mattered and which were merely discomforts given shape? You roll on the straw, muttering, and your sister nudges you with a sleepy elbow. The touch drags you closer to waking, but not fully. You hover in between, where the embers of the hearth are glowing too brightly, and your father's cough is echoing louder than life. The dream world and the hut seem to overlap, as though the barrier between them is as thin as smoke. The pig grunts, startling you awake at last. You blink into the darkness, your heart pounding. The fire is dim, the hut is unchanged, and your family is asleep all around you. Yet the dream lingers in your chest, as heavy as a stone. You lie still, staring up at the rafters, the smoke swirling faintly above, and you wonder whether it was only a dream or something more. Sleep eventually drags you under again, but it's lighter this time, fractured and fleeting. You understand now why medieval people spoke of their dreams so often. They were not an escape, but another form of endurance, shaped by hunger, by smoke, and by the relentless cold. And whether they were a warning, a prophecy, or an illusion, they carried the weight of the world outside and the fragility of life within these thin wooden walls. The haze of the dream lingers as you wake up again. But this time, it isn't fear or hunger that pulls you into awareness. It's curiosity. You find yourself wondering if this broken rhythm of a first sleep, a period of wakefulness, and then a second sleep is the way people have always rested, or if it is simply how the winters here demand that you live. Surviving documents from the Middle Ages suggest that this segmented sleep was indeed common, but there's still no single answer. Some chronicles describe people waking up around midnight to pray, to tend to their fires, or even to visit their neighbors. Medical texts from the period mention the first sleep and the second sleep as though they were just ordinary parts of daily life. To them, rising for an hour or two in the middle of the night wasn't strange at all. It was expected. You sit up slightly, looking around the hut. Your father dozes in shallow bursts, always ready to rise if the fire falters. Your mother lies still, one arm across the baby, her breath steady but shallow. Your siblings shift occasionally, muttering half-formed words. The hut is full of this broken rhythm, with everyone moving in and out of wakefulness like the tides. Some modern researchers argue that this pattern was a natural response to the long winter nights. Without artificial light, the darkness would stretch for 14 hours or more, far too long for uninterrupted sleep. The body, they say, simply adapted by dividing it into two more manageable portions. Others believe that necessity drove the habit. The fires demanded tending, the animals needed checking, and dangers prowled just beyond the walls. Both explanations make perfect sense as you sit here in the smoky dark, your body neither fully awake nor fully asleep. One curious reference from a court record describes a villager confessing to some mischief that occurred during the hours between sleeps. It seems that people sometimes use this time for more than just prayer or chores, whispered conversations, quiet intimacy, even small gatherings. The thought makes you glance at your parents, wondering if their own whispers sometimes carried more than just prayers. There's no firm agreement among historians on how universal this segmented sleep truly was. Did everyone across Europe follow it, Or was it only those in the harsher climates where the winter nights lasted longer? Some argue that it was widespread. Others insist that it varied by region and circumstance. The debate continues, but here in your hut, the reality feels undeniable. The night is simply too long to pass without an interruption. You lie back down, folding your arms under your head, and consider how different this rhythm feels from the idea of one long, unbroken slumber. There is a certain intimacy to it. The midnight pause creates a quiet space, a time to reflect, to pray, to talk softly, or simply to listen. Perhaps you think it makes the night less frightening, breaking it into pieces that can be endured, rather than one endless stretch of darkness. One odd folk belief held that dreams that came after the first sleep were truer, more reliable, because the body was lighter and the soul was freer. You recall your grandmother insisting that the morning dreams predicted harvests or illnesses, while the early night dreams were just meaningless noise. The thought lingers as you close your eyes again, wondering whether your smoky visions of bread and wolves might mean something after all. The embers are glowing faintly under their ash blanket, steady and waiting. You sigh, letting your body sink back into the straw. Around you, the others stir and settle in their turn. It is a rhythm that is older than you, perhaps older than memory itself, the body waking, then surrendering, then waking again. And so you drift towards your second sleep, your mind carrying the question with you. Is this simply how humans are meant to rest? Or is it only how you must rest here, in a hut of smoke and frost, with the winter pressing hard against these thin wooden walls? Either way, you surrender, your eyes closing, your body slipping once more into the cycle that has shaped countless nights before and will shape countless nights to come. The second sleep deepens, but before long you stir again, this time not because of hunger or fear, but because the hut is suddenly louder. There are more voices, more breathing, more weight on the straw pallet. You blink into the emberglow and realize what's happened. Another family has joined yours for the night. Accounts from village chronicles reveal that in the harshest of winters, neighbors would often shelter together. When the cold turned deadly, it was safer to huddle in one space than for each household to try and brave the night separately. Small huts became crowded arks, filled not only with kin, but with cousins, neighbors, and even travelers who had no other refuge. It was survival through sheer numbers, where warmth was measured in bodies rather than in firewood. You shift to make room, pressing tighter against your siblings as your aunt settles down beside your mother, wrapping her cloak around a coughing child. On the far side, your uncle lays a rough sack on the floor, using it as his bedding. Even the animals seem unsettled by the newcomers. The goat bleats softly, and the pig grunts in protest before nestling back into its straw. One curious note from parish records mentions the disputes that would arise during these crowded nights. Arguments would flare up over space on the pallet, over who deserved more of the blanket, over whose turn it was to stoke the fire. Yet, even amid the squabbles, families chose closeness over solitude. It was better to argue while warm than to freeze apart. Researchers continue to discuss how frequent this practice of communal sheltering really was. Some argue it was only for emergencies, when storms raged or famine pressed hard. Others suggest it was a regular occurrence in smaller villages where kinship bonds were strong and the huts were small. Whatever the frequency, Tonight you can feel the truth of it pressing against your shoulder. Survival is a shared effort. The air is thicker now, heavy with the breath of more people. The smoke hangs lower and your eyes sting a little sharper. Someone coughs, someone snores, someone mutters a prayer. The chorus of the hut grows louder, messier, more human. You can feel the heat rising, though undeniably, as though the hut itself is exhaling more warmly with each body that has been added. One odd tradition recorded in folklore is that when families shared huts, they would sometimes exchange charms or blessings before they went to sleep. An aunt might tuck a sprig of herbs under her host's pillow, or a cousin might whisper a saint's name for protection. These gestures, as small as they were, helped to ease the tensions in the crowded spaces, turning a necessity into a ritual. You wonder if your aunt will do the same before the morning, hiding a charm in the quilt's folds. You try to find sleep again, though it is harder now. Your cousin's elbow is jabbing your side, and your sister is squirming, grumbling softly. The straw beneath you shifts and rustles as more weight presses into it. Still, as your body adjusts, you notice the warmth spreading. The draft from the door feels weaker now, the cold less sharp. In this crowded heap, comfort is scarce, but warmth is abundant. Experts have long debated whether this closeness bred more intimacy or more resentment. Did the families emerge stronger from the winters spent shoulder to shoulder, or were they just weary of each other's constant presence? Perhaps both. You think of how tomorrow will bring complaints of elbows, of smells, of snoring. But for now, the only thing that matters is that no one is alone. The hut groans again as the wind presses against it, but this time you feel steadier. With twice as many people, the night feels less threatening. If wolves are lurking outside, they'll find the hut alive with sound. If the frost hag passes by, she'll find the warmth of so many bodies defiant against her chill. You smile faintly, drifting again into drowsiness, your cheek pressed against the rough fabric, your ears filled with the noisy, reassuring chaos of survival. And so the hut becomes not just a shelter for your family, but a gathering place for endurance. A reminder that in winter's grip, warmth is not a luxury, but a shared burden, passed from body to body, night after night. You wake again, this time to the faint clink of clay mugs and the low murmur of voices. In the middle of the night, your father has poured a little ale into wooden cups, passing them around to the adults, and even giving the older children a swallow. You sit up, blurry-eyed, and accept the warm drink. It smells sour and earthy, but oddly inviting. One established detail from medieval life is how essential ale and mead were to daily survival. Water, often drawn from rivers or shallow wells, could be unsafe to drink, especially in the winter when runoff would muddy the sources. Ale, weak, fermented, and low in alcohol, was safer, more nourishing, and a steady companion to every meal. At night, a sip or two wasn't just a habit, it was a comfort, warmth in liquid form. You raise the mug to your lips. The ale is tepid, warmed slightly by the hearth. Its bitterness is softened by the faint sweetness of the malt. It burns gently down your throat, settling in your belly like a small, warm ember. You sigh, your shoulders loosening, the cold pushed back a little further from within. Around you, the others do the same, their faces softening in the dim light. One curious tidbit recorded in household accounts is that even children would drink small portions of ale with their supper and before bed. It wasn't seen as an indulgence or a danger, but simply as nourishment. Stronger brews, like mead made from honey or the spiced wines for the wealthy, were far beyond the reach of peasants. For families like yours, ale was like daily bread in liquid form. There's an ongoing discussion among historians about how much this nightly drink actually shaped medieval sleep. Some argue that the ale acted like a sedative, numbing aches and anxieties, and allowing the peasants to sink into rest despite all the discomfort. Others suggest its effect was slight, more of a ritual than a remedy. Sitting here now, the warmth in your chest and the soft haze in your head make you lean toward the first explanation. Your aunt chuckles softly after her sip, her cheeks flushed in the ember glow. Your father smiles faintly, the first trace of relief you've seen on his tired face all night. Even your mother, who is always careful and sparing, closes her eyes for a moment, savoring the small luxury. It isn't a feast, and it isn't more firewood, but it is something that makes the night easier to endure. The smell of the ale fills the hut, mingling with the smoke and the sweat. It is sharp but familiar, the scent of every supper, every festival, every weary night. You lick the rim of the cup, chasing the last few drops, reluctant to let it go. When your father takes the mug back, you already feel heavier, your limbs warm and sluggish. Experts note that alcohol often blurred the line between nourishment and escape. For the peasants, it dulled pain and worry. For the nobles, it was a stage for excess. Yet in huts like yours, ale was neither a luxury nor a vice. It was medicine against the cold, a quiet balm for frayed nerves. You lean back down on the straw, your eyes already drooping. Your sister giggles faintly beside you, her words slurred as she mutters about warm bread waiting for her in her dreams. Even the baby, who is too young for ale, seems calmer in the soot-thick air, soothed by the softened voices of the adults. The hut hums with low conversation now. Stories are traded in whispers. Someone recalls a summer harvest. Someone else murmurs about a wedding feast. The memories spill out like mead, sweet and bittersweet, filling the hut with something brighter than the glow of the embers: hope. These stories, just like the drink, warm you from within. Gradually, the voices fade again, the bodies settling, the mugs tucked away. The embers pulse softly, the blanket presses heavy, and the ale hums in your blood like a lullaby. Your last thought before sleep finally takes you is a simple, almost grateful one. Even in a winter this brutal, there is still something warm to share, still something to drink, still a way to soften the edges of the night. And with that, you slip into your second sleep fully, carried by the ale, the memory, and the promise of dawn. The ale's warmth lingers in your chest, but soon, the night presses its weight down on you again. This time, it's not the cold or the creak of the timbers that wakes you, but the faint sound of whispered prayers. You blink into the dark and see your mother's lips moving silently, her hands clasped tightly over the baby as though she's shielding him with more than just her arms. Medieval households leaned heavily on devotion during the long winters. Saints, relics, and prayers wove themselves into the daily rhythms, but at night their role felt even sharper. The darkness was thick with dangers. Wolves, sickness, hunger, frost, and faith became a shield, no thicker than a breath, yet strong enough to calm the heart. You listen to her whisper now. The words are familiar. A prayer to Saint Bridget, the protector of hearths, asking her to guard the fire and keep the frost from creeping inside. Sometimes she prays to Saint Blaise, the patron of throats, when the coughing grows worse in the hut. Other times it is Saint Joseph who is invoked for shelter and safety. The saints are like unseen neighbors, their presence invited into the hut as though another body might add to the warmth. One curious custom that has been found in rural records is the placing of small relics, bits of cloth that were said to have touched a saint, or crude wooden crosses, beneath pillows or beside the hearth. Some families even stitched them into their quilts, believing the holy object would extend its blessing into every corner of the hut. You remember your grandmother hiding a tiny wooden cross in the rafters, where the smoke would curl past it each night. "Let the smoke carry the prayers upward," she had said, her voice cracked but firm. Scholarly voices remain divided over how much genuine comfort such rituals actually brought, versus how much they simply reflected the church's expectations. Were the peasants truly anchored by these nightly prayers? Or did they just whisper them out of habit, afraid of what might happen if they didn't? You watch your mother's expression in the ember light and you know it doesn't really matter. The belief itself is a form of warmth, just as real as fur or fire. Your father stirs, adding his own low murmur. His words are less formal, more like a plea. Strength for the woodpile, health for the children, another day of survival. Faith doesn't erase fear, but it shapes it, turns it into something that can be named and spoken. And in the numbing, it becomes lighter to bear. You shift under the quilt, remembering how the prayers would sometimes blend with charms and superstitions. Salt sprinkled at the door, herbs tucked under the bedding, words whispered over the embers. None of it felt contradictory. Religion and folk belief were braided together, forming a rope of hope that was strong enough to cling to. One odd practice mentioned in the Chronicles is the bedtime blessing of the animals. Families would cross themselves and then gesture toward their pig, goat, or hens, murmuring a line of protection. The animals, too, were seen as vulnerable to the frost and the spirits. Watching your mother's eyes dart briefly toward the pig's corner, you realize she carries that habit too, her devotion wrapping around every living thing in the hut. The baby sighs and nuzzles into her chest, quieting as though soothed by her words. Your sister stirs, half asleep, and mimics the gesture of crossing herself without even opening her eyes. Even you find your own lips moving in silence, repeating words you don't fully understand but know by heart. Experts often note how religion gave medieval people a sense of continuity. Each night's prayer echoed the last, connecting one winter to another, one generation to the next. In a world where survival felt so uncertain, devotion stitched life together, a thread that carried people through. The hut seems softer now, calmer. The embers glow steadily. The animals rest quietly. The wind outside has faded to a whisper. Whether it is the power of the saints or simply the comfort of the ritual, you feel steadier too. The fear loosens, replaced by a gentle heaviness in your limbs. You close your eyes, your last thought not of wolves or hunger, but of the fragile, invisible shield that is woven by whispered prayers. They cannot stop the frost from pressing at the door, but they can wrap the heart in something warmer than cloth. And sometimes, in winters like this, that is enough to carry you back into sleep. The hush of the prayers has barely faded when another sound intrudes, the deep groan of the timbers as the wind lashes against the walls. The hut trembles, its joints creaking like an old ship on stormy seas. You open your eyes again, staring upward as flakes of frost sift down from the rafters, shaken loose by the storm. Contemporary descriptions from travelers often remark on how fragile peasant huts felt during winter storms. Built of rough-hewn logs or wattle and daub, they could only hold back so much of the cold and wind. When gales swept across the village, the walls would flex, the roofs would rattle, and the thatch would threaten to lift away entirely. Inside, the families would huddle together, listening to every groan as if they were waiting for it all to collapse. You can feel that anxiety now. The wind howls through the forest outside, hitting the hut with sudden gusts that make the door rattle on its frame. The draft sneaks in instantly, chilling your cheeks. A cousin mutters in his sleep and pulls the quilt tighter, while your father grips his staff, his body tense even as he lies down. Everyone feels it, the storm pressing against your fragile shell of survival. One curious detail in the village records is that children were sometimes told to press their hands against the walls during storms, as though their small weight might help to hold the hut steady. You remember doing this as a child, your palms flat on the rough boards, whispering that you were keeping the house from blowing away. Tonight, you almost feel the urge to try it again, though you know it would change nothing. Scholars have long debated just how effective these huts really were against extreme weather. Some argue that well-built timber structures, packed with clay and dung, were surprisingly sturdy. Others point to frequent records of roof collapses and wall failures under heavy snow. The truth likely lay somewhere in between. Skill, luck, and constant repair determined whether a family slept safe or not. The sounds inside intensify under the storm's weight. The fire hisses as the wind sneaks through the cracks, feeding the embers with sudden bursts of air. The roof sighs under the burden of snow sliding down, each thud making the sleepers jolt. A chicken flaps wildly before settling down again, unsettled by the vibrations. Even the pig lets out a sharp grunt, as though it is reminding the storm that the hut is full of life and will not be shaken so easily. One odd folk practice for nights like this was scattering ashes across the threshold, which was believed to confuse the malevolent spirits that were carried by the wind. Families sometimes added iron nails or knives stuck into the door frames as talismans against collapse. You glance at the doorway now and see the faint glint of your father's iron blade leaning nearby. Whether it's a charm or a tool, it steadies you to know that it's there. You lie still, listening, your heart thumping with each groan of the walls. The hut is not just wood and straw. It feels alive, breathing and straining like another member of the family. You whisper in your thoughts, almost like a prayer, hold fast. Don't break, stay with us. Experts suggest that storms like these shaped not only sleep, but also the imagination. Tales of spirits riding the wind, of witches flying through the night gales, of saints battling demons above the clouds. These grew from nights spent lying awake, listening to the roofs tremble and the doors shake. In the fragile dark, every sound could become a story. Gradually, though, your body adapts. The storm is loud, yes, but it has a rhythm. The howl, the rattle, the groan, it repeats, familiar in its violence. Your breathing begins to sync with it, slower and calmer. You burrow deeper under the quilt, feeling the warmth of your cousins and siblings pressing against you. The hut may bend, but it holds. Your eyelids droop even as the storm continues its assault. You understand why your ancestors filled the long winters with stories of survival. Because in moments like this, the only thing between you and the storm is a fragile hut, a patchwork quilt, and the stubborn will to endure. And somehow, against all the odds, you do. The storm eventually quiets, though not completely. The wind no longer rattles the door with such force, but you can hear a softer, steadier hiss, the sound of snow piling itself up against the hut. You stir awake once more, shifting in the straw, and realize with a sinking feeling that the night's battle with the cold has only changed its shape. Now it isn't the howl of the wind that threatens you, but the creeping weight of the snow, pressing silently against your fragile walls. Accounts from medieval villages make it clear how dangerous the snow could be, not just as weather, but as a physical burden. When the drifts climbed too high, doors were blocked, roofs collapsed, and huts became tombs if the families weren't quick enough to dig their way out. The chroniclers wrote of winters where houses simply vanished beneath a white silence, entire hamlets buried until the thaw. You can feel the draft grow sharper near the door, and your father rises, muttering. He takes a wooden shovel, leans his weight against the door, and pushes hard. Snow cascades inside in a powdery spill, with cold air rushing in right behind it. He curses under his breath, then pushes again, clearing just enough to keep the door from sealing completely shut. You watch him silently, your breath fogging in the smoky air, realizing that even in sleep's fragile grasp, the winter never stops demanding your effort. One curious folk method for nights like these was propping a pole against the roof beams from the inside, a way of reminding the house to hold its shape under the snow. Some people even tapped the rafters with sticks before they went to bed, a ritual that was meant to warn the spirits of a collapse. You glance upward now and wonder if the groan of the roof is only the wood under strain, or if something unseen is pressing down as well. Historians remain divided on whether the snow was more often a killer or a savior. Some argue that the thick drifts packed against the huts actually acted as insulation, trapping the heat like a crude igloo. Others insist that the weight was always a hazard. Both views seem possible as you lie here. The hut feels warmer now that the snow is muffling the walls, but each creak from above makes your stomach tight. The animals stir restlessly. The goat shifts on its tether, stamping once, its ears twitching. The pig grunts low, burrowing deeper into its straw. Even the hens ruffle their feathers nervously on their perch. Animals sense weight and silence differently than humans do. Their unease spreads quickly through the hut, waking everyone up bit by bit, a ripple of awareness in the smoky dark. One odd tidbit that was recorded in village law is the belief that when animals grew restless during snowstorms, it was a warning that the roof might soon give way. Families would sometimes carry their goats or chickens outside in the dead of night just to lighten the load, a desperate act when the snow was pressing down too heavily. You picture such a scene and shudder, imagining your father pushing the animals through waist-deep drifts under a frozen sky. The hut groans again, but it holds. Your mother pulls the quilt tighter over you and your siblings, whispering calm words, though her eyes flick up toward the ceiling. You understand the performance. The children must be soothed even if the parents themselves feel the same dread. The quilt is warmer now, the bodies pressed closer, the snow muting the sound of the wind outside. For a moment, it almost feels peaceful, as though the whole world has been muffled. Experts note how such nights bred resilience, but also shaped folklore. The silence of the snow was often described as eerie, otherworldly. Some villagers spoke of hearing voices carried in the muffled dark, as though spirits moved freely when the earth was blanketed in white. Others said that the snow itself was a blessing from heaven, a quilt laid over the earth just as the family stitched quilts over themselves. Both fear and reverence filled the same frozen air. You press your hand against the wall, feeling the faint cold of the snow through the boards. It is both a barrier and a threat. Your eyes close again, your mind drifting between the warmth of the quilt and the image of the white drifts pressing against the hut. The night continues, heavy but steady. The roof creaks, the animals shift, and your father mutters a prayer while settling back down beside your mother. And you press tight between your siblings, surrender once more to slumber, trusting the hut, the beams, and the sheer stubbornness of survival to hold the snow at bay until the morning light. The snow's pressure seems to ease as the dawn inches closer, but you wake up once more, not from the cold, not from fear, but from the simple discomfort of too many bodies crammed together. The straw mattress beneath you feels smaller with every hour, compressed by the weight of your kin, your neighbors, and the animals. Your shoulder aches where your cousin has rolled against it, and your legs are numb from being pinned under your brother's knee. Descriptions from medieval accounts remind us that overcrowding was the rule, not the exception. Privacy was a concept that was almost unknown to peasant families. Whole households, and sometimes their extended kin, would share a single sleeping space. In the winter, there was no thought of dignity or personal comfort. The only question was whether the collective body heat outweighed the discomfort of all the limbs being tangled together. You push gently against your cousin's elbow, trying to reclaim a scrap of space, but he only grumbles and tightens his blanket. You sigh, turning instead toward your sister, whose hair is now tickling your nose. Everywhere you move, you brush up against someone else. The hut feels less like a home and more like a crowded ship at sea, with everyone packed in tight, surviving together in a fragile balance. One curious note from folk traditions is that families often developed sleeping hierarchies. The elders would claim the outer edges of the bedding, both to guard against the drafts and to shield the younger children in the middle. Teenagers were sometimes pushed toward the coldest corners, expected to endure it with their youthful resilience. Tonight, you can notice the pattern. Your parents are on the edges, and the younger siblings are clustered in the middle, with you caught somewhere between duty and comfort. There's a debate among social historians about whether this close sleeping fostered more intimacy or more tension. Some argue that the shared warmth bred stronger family bonds. Others suggest that the constant lack of privacy led to quarrels and resentment. You can feel both truths in your own body, comfort in your sister's warmth and irritation at your cousin's elbow. The smells of the overcrowding are strong tonight. Sweat clings to the quilt, mingling with the sour tang of ale still on your father's breath, the musky odor of the animals, and the sharp scent of the smoke. The air is so thick you can almost feel it pressing down, heavier than the quilt itself. Yet within that heaviness lies a reassurance. There are so many heartbeats, so much breath proof that life endures. One odd tidbit from the parish records mentions that when the huts were at their most crowded, the children would sometimes play games of guessing who was snoring. They learned to identify their relatives by sound, laughing quietly even in the dark. You smile faintly at the thought, hearing your uncle's thunderous rumble from the far side of the hut and your aunt's higher-pitched whistle. Even discomfort has its own amusements. You shift again, pressing your back against the wall for some relief. Though the boards are cold and rough, your hand brushes against the frost that is creeping along the inner surface, reminding you how thin the barrier is. But when your sister nestles closer, her breath warm against your cheek, the contrast eases. Experts often highlight how this communal sleeping blurred the boundaries between individual and collective life. Decisions were made together, stories were shared together, and dreams were overheard in the middle of the night. In such closeness, there was very little room for secrecy. You think now of how your father mutters his prayers aloud, how your mother hums her lullabies, how your cousins grumble about their dreams. Everything is public, even in sleep. Gradually, the discomfort begins to soften as exhaustion returns. Your limbs adjust to the tangle, finding some crooked arrangement where you can breathe. The press of the bodies, though irritating, is also steadying. Alone, the cold would devour you. Together, it becomes bearable. Your eyes close, your ears filled with the layered sounds of breathing, snoring, and shifting. The hut feels like a single creature now, dozens of lungs moving in an uneven rhythm, hearts thudding in a scattered unison. You are just one part of its body, inseparable from the whole. And with that thought, you let yourself drift back into sleep, lulled not by comfort, but by the sheer weight of human closeness, the warmth of many lives crowded into one fragile wooden hut, enduring the brutal winter together. The weight of the bodies keeps you warm, but that warmth is never steady. You wake up again when someone shifts the quilt too far to one side. A rush of cold air slips in through the drafty cracks, stabbing at your skin like needles. You pull desperately at the blanket, tugging it back over your shoulders. But in a crowded heap, the coverings are always a tug of war. Medieval inventories and household notes remind us how precious blankets and coverings really were. For wealthy families, there were woolen cloaks, fur throws, and feather quilts. For peasants, there were patched quilts, coarse woolen mantles, or sometimes nothing more than a cloak that was worn by day and repurposed at night. The coverings weren't just for comfort. They were shields against death in the coldest months. You bury your chin beneath the heavy cloth, trying to find where the warmth still lingers. The edges are damp, stained from the melted snow that was tracked in during the evening. Your cousin tugs at it too, and for a moment you glare at him in the darkness, though you know he's just as desperate as you are. One curious folk practice in parts of Europe was placing heated bricks or stones at the foot of the bed, wrapped in rags, to keep the toes from freezing. In huts like yours, sometimes embers were placed in clay pots, carefully sealed, and then tucked near the bedding. It was dangerous, yes, but worth the risk when the frost bit deep. You can imagine how welcome such a warmth would feel now against your numbed feet. Experts argue about whether peasants slept under fur more often than the records suggest. Fur blankets appear in wills and dowries, but rarely in village accounts. Some scholars believe that poor families kept their hides primarily for clothing, while others argue that in the most desperate winters, furs were spread across the bedding heap. You remember once curling up beneath a sheepskin, the lanolin smell strong, but the warmth unforgettable. The blanket covering you now is less glamorous. Its wool patched with linen, with a strip of fur stitched haphazardly at the edge. It scratches your skin and smells of smoke, sweat, and damp earth. Yet you cling to it fiercely. It is imperfect, but it is the only barrier between your body and the icy drafts that slip through the hut's seams. One odd tidbit from rural tradition was the belief that red cloth could ward off illness. Families would sometimes add a red patch deliberately to their quilts, thinking it carried a protective power. You glance in the dim ember light and catch a glimpse of one such patch sewn near the edge, a faded crimson square, its color dulled but still visible. It was your mother's doing, no doubt. Whether for protection or just out of necessity, it adds a strange reassurance. The quilt shifts again as someone turns over, and once more the cold sneaks in. You groan softly, pulling it back. In this hut, sharing means compromise. No one ever really has enough, yet everyone has just barely enough to survive. The blankets are tugged back and forth all night long, but no one dares to hoard them completely. To do so would be to doom the others. Scholars suggest that this constant negotiation of warmth shaped social bonds as much as it shaped survival. Children learned early on not to be selfish with the coverings. The adults tolerated the discomfort for the sake of the group. You can sense the truth of that now as you loosen your own grip, letting the quilt slide just enough to cover your sister. Her small sigh of relief warms you more than the cloth itself. The quilt presses down heavily again as everyone settles. Beneath it, the warmth slowly returns, a fragile bubble of shared heat. The air outside still howls and the rafters still creak, but within this patchwork covering you feel shielded, if only barely. Your eyelids close once more. The blanket scratches, smells, and shifts constantly. Yet it is a lifeline, a memory, and a shield all at once. It may not banish the cold entirely, but it is proof that scraps stitched together can hold back death's chill, and that is enough to carry you into sleep again. You shift again, your body aching in the places where the straw has thinned down to the bare earth. No bedding lasts forever. Each night, as the families turn and press their weight into it, the straw flattens, dampens, and grows foul. You can feel the cold seeping upward through the gaps where the layer has worn thin, the ground beneath unyielding and icy. Archaeological evidence and medieval household notes both confirm that the bedding had to be replaced often. Straw pallets were never permanent fixtures. They were seasonal, sometimes renewed every few weeks, sometimes stretched until the spring, depending on the resources. In the winter, when the snow covered the fields, collecting fresh straw or rushes was a difficult task. Families had to endure the smell and the discomfort for far longer than they wished. You roll over slightly and inhale. The scent of the bedding is sharp now. Sweat, smoke, animal musk, and even the faint ammonia of urine where the children or the animals couldn't always hold it through the night. This is the reality that no one writes into the heroic tales of castles and knights. Survival in these huts meant living with a stench and a filth that was woven into every single stalk of straw. One curious tidbit that has been passed down in rural sayings is that clean rushes mean a clean soul. Some families believed that replacing the bedding was more than just hygiene. It was a spiritual duty. In the towns, even the churches would replace their rushes regularly, scattering herbs like lavender or mint among them. Peasant families did the same when they could. But in the winter, mint and lavender were only memories of the summer. Scholars remain divided on whether medieval people simply became desensitized to the filth, or if they noticed it as sharply as we would today. Some argue that the constant exposure dulled their senses, while others point to sermons and folk rhymes that complained about fleas, lice, and the stink as proof that people despised it, but simply had to endure. Lying here scratching your arm, you know there is no way to ignore it entirely. The fleas are alive in the straw tonight, biting whenever you shift. You slap absently at your leg, then curl up tighter, trying not to disturb the vermin too much. Your sister is scratching too, her nails rasping faintly in the dark. The rustling becomes part of the night's soundtrack, as inevitable as the snores or the creak of the beams. One odd practice that villagers sometimes tried was sprinkling ash into the bedding, believing that it would repel the vermin. Others would tuck herbs into the straw during the harvest, hoping the fragrance would outlast the winter. You remember once finding a brittle sprig of rosemary in your palate. Its smell was faint but pleasant amid the stink. For a moment, it felt like a promise of summer. Experts note that despite the squalor, the bedding remained central to medieval life. Births, deaths, sicknesses, and the nightly rest all unfolded on the same pallet. The straw might be foul, but it was also a witness, absorbing not only the odors and the vermin, but also the milestones of existence. It was both despised and indispensable. You close your eyes, trying to focus on the quilt's weight rather than the itch of the fleas. The straw rustles as your cousin turns over, releasing a puff of dust into the air. It stings your nose and makes you cough softly, but gradually, the exhaustion presses down heavier than the discomfort. The bedding may reek, itch, and collapse beneath you, but it still does its job. It lifts you just enough above the frozen earth, keeping death's chill from creeping fully into your bones. And so, despite everything, the stink, the vermin, the aches, you surrender again to a shallow slumber, proving once more that survival rarely looks like comfort, but it always looks like endurance. The itching from the fleas and the stench of the damp straw eventually fade into the rhythm of breath and warmth, but your sleep is shallow. Your mind drifts toward thoughts of the fire, your most fragile lifeline. Even when it's banked under ash, the embers can fade before dawn, and without them, the hut would become a tomb of frost by morning. One established detail from medieval life is how carefully the fires were tended through the night. Families rarely let the flame die out completely, as relighting it in the winter was difficult and dangerous. Instead, the embers were covered with ash to smolder slowly, conserving the heat until the morning. This banking kept the coals alive, ready to flare up again with fresh fuel. You turn your head toward the hearth, squinting at the faint glow. A thin line of red still pulses beneath the gray ash, like the very heartbeat of the hut itself. Your father rises again, his shoulders stooped, and he prods the coals with an iron poker. He adds a small stick, not enough to waste the wood, but just enough to coax the fire into breathing. The glow brightens faintly, the smoke curling upward into the rafters. One curious folk method that was used to guard the fire was covering the embers with dried dung mixed with straw. It insulated the coals better than ash alone, ensuring they would live until morning. The smell, acrid and strong, filled the huts with a sharper tang, but the families tolerated it. Its smoke was preferable to freezing. You wrinkle your nose even now, wondering if your father has used such a trick tonight. Scholars still argue about how much of a peasant's day revolved around firekeeping. Some claim it was constant labor, with the hearth requiring attention like a living creature. Others argue it was second nature, woven seamlessly into their routines. Watching your father now, you can see the truth in both views. The fire is both a burden and a companion demanding care but rewarding it with survival. The animals shift restlessly when the sparks leap. The goat stamps once, startled, and the hens murmur on their perch. Even the pig lifts its head, grunting, before sinking back into the straw. The fire doesn't only warm the humans, it calms the entire hut. Without it, the beasts would grow as restless as the people. One odd tidbit that has been preserved in local law is that families would sometimes speak to the fire as if it were alive, thanking it aloud for its warmth. You remember your grandmother patting the hearth's edge and murmuring, "Stay with us." Perhaps it was superstition, perhaps it was affection, but on nights like this, the fire feels as much a member of the family as any child. You watch as your father lowers himself down again, satisfied. The embers are glowing steadily now, painting his face in a faint red light before he disappears back under the quilt. The hut settles once more, warmed not by roaring flames but by the quiet endurance of the coals. Experts note that hearths were more than just heat sources. They were the centers of life. Food was cooked there, stories were told there, and prayers were whispered there. Even in sleep, the fire remained the hut's heart, fragile but enduring. To lose it meant the family faced not just discomfort but death. You sigh, comforted by the glow. The smoke is thick, stinging your eyes, but you are grateful for it. You close your eyes again, letting the knowledge of the embers, alive and waiting, ease your mind. Sleep wraps around you like the quilt, fragile but sufficient. The fire will not burn out tonight. It will hold until the dawn, as it has every night before, carried by vigilance, tradition, and a stubborn human will. And with that assurance, you sink deeper into slumber, knowing that the hut's faint heartbeat still pulses in the hearth. The embers' glow steadies the hut, but you wake once more, not from the cold or the noise, but from the sheer press of the night itself. It feels endless, as though the dawn will never come. The darkness has thickened, wrapping around you so tightly that it feels almost like a second quilt, heavy, suffocating, and eternal. Medieval chronicles often mention how the long nights weighed on the mind. In Northern Europe, especially, the winter darkness would stretch for 14 or more hours, and without candles or lamps, the peasants lived mostly in shadow. The length of the night was as much of a challenge as the cold, gnawing away at hope and patience. You stare upward, your eyes straining for any light beyond the rafters. Only the faintest silver leaks through the cracks in the roof, moonlight or starlight softened by the snow. The hut itself seems to have been swallowed, a box adrift in an ocean of black. Even the red glow of the embers seems small and fragile, as though it could be snuffed out by a single breath. One curious custom that was described in monastic writings was the counting of prayers or the reciting of memorized psalms to pass the hours. Without clocks, time was measured in ritual or repetition. Families would whisper litanies together, or individuals would mutter words alone in the dark. Sometimes the children were told to count their breaths or the beads of their rosaries until sleep returned. You try the same thing now, counting your breaths. 1, 2, 3, as though the numbers might somehow shorten the night. There's an ongoing debate among scholars about whether the peasants feared the long night more than the cold itself. Some argue that the darkness carried stronger associations with evil, danger, and despair. Others believe that the villagers simply grew accustomed to it, accepting the shadow as a part of life. But lying here, staring into the endless black, you can feel why the fear lingered. The darkness is not just an absence. It is a presence, pressing, suffocating, and infinite. The hut groans faintly, and every sound becomes sharper in the dark. A cousin coughs, and it sounds louder than thunder. The goat shifts its hooves, and the noise seems magnified. Even your own heartbeat feels intrusive, thudding in your ears. With no light to soften your perception, every detail grows enormous, filling the silence until your mind begins to invent shapes and whispers that aren't truly there. One odd folk belief held that staring too long into the darkness allowed spirits to climb into your eyes. Children were told to shut their lids quickly at night, lest they let the dark inside. You close your eyes at the memory, suddenly wary of the rafters' shadows. Yet shutting your eyes brings its own unease. Dreams, half-waking visions, and the echo of the wolves that are still waiting outside. Experts often suggest that the winter darkness shaped medieval spirituality and imagination profoundly. In sermons, the night was a metaphor for sin, for despair, for trial. But it was also a space of waiting, of endurance, and of eventual redemption. Just as the dawn always followed, faith taught that light would eventually overcome the shadow. Whether people believed this literally or simply clung to it for hope, the rhythm of darkness and dawn shaped every single night of their lives. You shift in the straw, curling tighter under the quilt. Your sister presses against you, murmuring in her sleep, her warmth reminding you that you are not alone. The darkness may feel eternal, but you are bound to others in it, sharing its weight. Gradually, your breathing slows down again. The heaviness of the night remains, but it is softened by the presence of your family, their bodies as steady as anchors in a sea of dark. The hut is still afloat, the fire is still alive, and the dawn, though invisible, is still promised. And with that small assurance, you drift again into uneasy dreams, carried by the knowledge that no night lasts forever, even when it feels endless. You wake up once more. But this time, something feels different. The air still smells of smoke and sweat. The straw still scratches beneath you, and the bodies still press close. But a faint light is filtering through the cracks in the roof. It is not strong, not yet the sun, but it is there. The dawn has begun to stir. One detail that has been preserved in medieval accounts is how villagers would often rise before the sunrise, guided by the faintest gray light. The night was long, but work awaited them even before the sky had brightened. For the peasants, dawn was not a luxury of rest, but the call to labor, feeding the animals, breaking the ice for water, preparing the day's meager meal. Yet, even in their exhaustion, the dawn carried a sense of relief. It meant the hut had endured another night without collapse, without wolves, without death. You push yourself up slowly, stretching your stiff limbs. Around you, others groan and shift. The baby fusses, sensing the change before sight. Your father lifts his head, his eyes blurry but determined, already reaching for his boots. The pig snorts, shaking the straw from its back. Even the hens are stirring, their feathers rustling in faint anticipation. One curious folk practice was greeting the dawn with a whispered blessing. Families would mutter, "Thanks for surviving another night," crossing themselves as the light entered the hut. It was not a ceremony. It was an instinct, born of a gratitude that the frost and the shadow had not claimed them. You whisper your own quiet thanks, your lips barely moving, the words as natural as your breath. Scholars point out that the dawn did not mean comfort, only survival. Hunger would follow, the chores would weigh on them, and the cold would still bite. Yet psychologically, that thin line of light mattered immensely. It meant that time had moved, that winter had not won, that the endless night had been endured. The quilt is still heavy on your shoulders, damp with sweat and smoke. You push it aside, reluctantly, feeling the rush of cold air replace the warmth of all the bodies. The shock makes you shiver but also sharpens your mind. For a moment, you look around at the huddled forms of your family and your neighbors, their faces weary but alive. Survival, once again, has been achieved. One odd tidbit in village lore is that roosters were believed to chase away evil spirits with their crowing. As if on cue, you hear one outside, its call muffled by the snow but clear enough. The sound cuts through the last remnants of the night like a blade. The spirits, the frost hags, the wolves, all of them banished, at least until the darkness falls again. Experts often describe medieval mornings as both bleak and hopeful. Bleak for the labor that began immediately, but hopeful for the sheer fact of another day won. You feel that truth now as you rub your eyes, watching your mother stir, her voice low as she hums a morning prayer while shaking the crumbs of straw from her hair. The embers are glowing faintly, ready to be coaxed back into a flame. The hut still stands, its walls still upright despite the night's storm. The snow outside may be high, but inside, life endures. You take a deep breath, the smoky air filling your lungs, and you allow yourself a final moment of stillness before the day begins. Because this is the rhythm of winter life. Nights of fear, cold, and endurance, followed by mornings of survival. Each day carries the same trials, the same hunger, the same fragile fire, but also the same victory, small but profound. You have outlasted the night, and now, as the story softens, let yourself drift with it. The family in the wooden hut has endured another brutal night, wrapped in smoke, straw, and each other's warmth. Their struggles, fleas in the bedding, snow pressing on the roof, wolves howling outside, were real. Yet so too was their resilience. Night after night, they repeated this ritual of survival, and the dawn always came, even when it felt impossibly far away. As you breathe slowly now, picture the embers glowing faintly in the hearth. They are small but steady, carrying just enough warmth to comfort weary bodies. Imagine the quilt pulled up to your chin, its weight heavy but protective, stitched with scraps of memory and care. Around you, the muffled sound of breath and soft snoring is not a distraction but a reassurance, proof that life continues in a fragile harmony. The cold outside cannot touch you here. The snow may fall endlessly and the wind may shake the walls, but inside this hut there is shelter, warmth, and belonging. Close your eyes and let the crackle of the fire, the rustle of straw, and the rhythm of sleep carry you further into calm. Remember, no night is endless. Darkness always yields to light. Just as the peasants centuries ago endured their winters with patience and faith, so too can you let the weight of the night rest easy on your shoulders. You are safe in this story, safe in its rhythm, safe in its hush. So breathe in and breathe out, slowly, steadily, gently. Let your body grow heavier, your thoughts quieter, and your heart steadier. Allow the long night to fade behind you and drift, as they did, into a peaceful rest.